But you don't think he's going to make it to November of 24?
Well, I think he's worse mentally than he is physically, and physically he's not exactly a triathlete or any kind of an athlete. You look at him, he can't walk to the helicopter. He walks, he can't lift his feet out of the grass. You know, it's only 2 inches at the White House, right? That's not a lot. But you watch him, and it looks like he's walking on toothpicks. So, and then you see him on the beach where he can't lift a chair. You know, those chairs are meant to be light, right? They're like 2 ounces. You lift him up. He can't lift the chair. He can't walk to the chair. And I don't know what they're doing with the beach. You know, this beach is seeming to play a big role, but they love pictures of him on the beach. I think he looks terrible on the beach. He looks terrible on the beach.
Skinny legs?
Well, he can't walk through the sand. You know, sand is not that easy to walk through, but when he walks through it, he can't walk through the sand. And there's somebody in there that thinks he looks fabulous at the beach. I think he looks horrible at the beach. Plus, the beach doesn't represent what a president's supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be working. You're supposed to be getting us out of that horrible, horrible war that we're very much involved in with Russia and Ukraine. You could do that. You could do that very easily. I believe you could do that I don't believe he could do it because he's just incompetent. But that's a war that should end immediately, not because of one side or the other, because hundreds of thousands of people are being killed. Can you imagine you're in an apartment house and rockets are going into that building and blowing it up and knocking it down? And why should anybody, human beings, these are human, whether they're Russian or Ukrainian or whatever they are, it's got to be stopped. And it can't be stopped very easily. It would have never started. If I were president, it would have never started.
So back to Biden, I'm interested. So you think he's failing? He obviously is failing. I think it's clear to everybody. But that would make Kamala Harris the candidate?
Well, not really. I mean, I guess they'd have maybe a free-for-all. A lot of people say she has to remain for certain reasons the candidate. She has to. I don't think that's true, actually. I don't think that other people would stand for it. She has some bad moments. Her moments are almost as bad as his. I think his are worse, actually.
Yeah.
But
she seems pretty senile, too.
She speaks in rhyme. You know, it's weird. It's weird. But she has bad moments. And
in rhyme? What do you...
Well, the way she talks, the bus will go here and then the bus will go there because that's what buses do. And it's weird. The whole thing is weird. This is not a president of the United States future. And I think they probably have some kind of a primary and other people will get involved.
Newsom, right? I
mean, could be. I mean, you know, I always got along well with him, believe it or not. But could be him, could be somebody else. He's got a big load on his shoulders because you look at California, what's happened. But I don't know if the American people really, the people that vote for him, I don't even know if they care. You know, you look at so many of the things that are going on, and people don't seem to be, in the old days, if you had a bad record, it meant a lot. Today, if you have a bad record, it doesn't really mean anything. You know, he looks good, he's a nice looking guy, speaks well. But Biden, every time you watch him talking, it's like he's walking on eggs. You're waiting for him to collapse. And he almost always does. And I got to know the leaders of all of the countries, essentially, but the big ones. And the bigger, the tougher the leader. You know, it's like sort of, I guess maybe that's the way it's supposed to be. But I got to know President Xi of China and Putin and Kim Jong-un, North Korea. Did a great job with North Korea, kept us out of a nuclear war. We would have 40,000 dead soldiers right now. They'd drop a nuke right on top of the military base. But we have 40,000 soldiers over there. And I did great. I got along with him great. That's a positive. You know, the press said, he said nice things about Kim Jong-un. I also said horrible things at the beginning. Horrible enough that he wanted to talk. And we talked and we met in Singapore. We met actually twice. And we had unbelievable meetings. I know him very well. We were in great shape with him.
What do you think he and Xi and Putin think of Biden?
I think they can't believe it. I think they probably say this is some kind of a system. You know, they had great respect for our country. They respected me. They had great respect for our country when I was there. Every one of them. Look, if you go to North Korea, you take a look at what happened. You know, the Olympics was dead. South Korea spent billions on the Olympics. Nobody was going to go. They didn't want to get blown up. They called me and they said, we are going to let the Olympics proceed. This is North Korea. I said, you should go into the Olympics. Put your athletes in. It wasn't like, you know, they were big on athletes because, you know.
Famine.
But they went in and they actually participated. And within about 2 days, the entire thing was sold out. And if it wasn't me, that would have never happened. But I got along very well with him, and that's a positive thing. He does have massive nuclear power, by the way. And if Hillary would have gotten in, or if the Obama thought process continued, it would have been a nuclear war, absolutely, with North Korea. He was expecting to go into a war, and it would have been a nuclear war.
So do you think the rest of the world looks on at Biden and thinks someone else has got to be running the government?
Well, somebody else has to be. I don't think he's capable of doing anything. Look, when I debated him, I said, how come, and this was in front of probably not a friend of yours, Chris Wallace. He was the moderator.
Not a friend.
I said, why is it he wants to be Mike, but he doesn't have the talent? It's one of those
bitchy little man.
He wanted to be his father, but he didn't have the talent of his father was great. His father,
a little fussy man.
His father interviewed me in 60 Minutes. It was actually a 10. Can you believe it?
No, I totally. His father had talent, at least.
I may have been the only guy that he gave a good 60 Minutes to. He was rough.
Really?
His father was tough. He was great, though. He was great at what he did. But Chris Wallace was so upset. He was guarding this guy who wouldn't do a show, by the way. He wouldn't do. I figured. I didn't mind Chris Wallace because Biden wouldn't do a show. And it was very obvious. He kept asking him and asking, but he wouldn't do the show. So I figured he's got to like me. But he came from a different planet. But remember when I asked the question, why is it that the mayor of Moscow's wife is allowed to give you $3.5 million? Don't forget, that was brought up. Now it's brought up all the time. But that was brought up by me long before anyone ever heard of it. I said, the mayor of Moscow's wife giving you $3.5 million. What did you do to deserve $3.5 million? To Biden. And Chris Wallace said, this has nothing to do with the debate. I mean, he
got in the way of the question.
No, it was crazy. And I said, well, wait a minute. He got $3.5 million from the mayor of Moscow's wife. Now, people forget that, but if you go back and take a look, you will see. And Chris Wallace didn't want me to ask that question. I said, I think it's a very appropriate question. It turned out to be much more appropriate than people thought.
Amazing. So do you have a preference in, assuming you're the Republican nominee and all goes as you plan it to go, do you have a preference in who you run against?
In many ways, I'd love to run against him because his record's so bad. It's still horrible when you look at inflation and everything else, but others also have very bad records. I mean, California's a bad record, so, should it be Gavin or should it be somebody else? When I look at San Francisco, what's happened to that incredible city. That was one of the greatest cities in the world just a short while ago, and now it's very sad when you look at it. Los Angeles, every city practically, all the Democrat-run cities. Republican-run cities are doing very nicely because they arrest people when you have crimes, and they don't go after political candidates because they think it's good. It's been amazing. My poll numbers are the highest I've ever had, but because people understand it.
Can I just ask you, that gets back to my original question. So if the protest didn't work, you got elected anyway. Yeah. Impeachment didn't work twice, obviously. Indictment is not working. Your poll numbers go up. When they raided Mar-a-Lago in August of last year, your numbers went up. They can indict you 20 times and you're not going to lose the Republican primary because of that.
Well, so it makes it look even more ridiculous. I mean, the 4 indictments, and maybe there'll be more. I don't know. These people are crazy.
But they're counterproductive. So if you chart it out, it's an escalation, is what I'm saying. Yeah. So what's next? After, try to put you in prison for the rest of your life. That's not working. So, don't they have to kill you now?
I think the people of our country don't get enough credit for how smart they are. And I'm not sure I would have said this 10 years ago, but they get it. They really get it. When somebody gets indicted, your poll numbers go down. When somebody gets indicted, you announce, ladies and gentlemen, I'll be leaving to spend time with my family and to fight for the rest of my life on this stuff. But you're out of politics. I got indicted 4 times. All trivia, nonsense, bullshit. It's all bullshit. It's horrible when you look and you look at what they're doing. The boxes hoax, I'm covered by the Presidential Records Act. I'm allowed to do exactly that. He's not covered, and he's got 25 times the number of boxes, and he's got them stored in Chinatown. He's got them stored in a flimsy garage underneath his Corvette at Penn. And by the way, at Penn, he gets millions of dollars. China pays this guy millions of dollars. See, I think he's the most corrupt president we've ever had. And he also has the distinction of being the most incompetent. And I believe both. I mean, he's both incompetent and corrupt.
So
and
who
I
is running the
actually
government?
believe he's compromised because China knows so much about him. They know where the money comes from. They know where it is, who paid it, and they probably paid it. Well, they do pay Penn, and he gets $1 million. I think he takes $999,000 because keeps it a little bit under $1 million, like by $1. But he, in many ways, is a Manchurian candidate. We have a Manchurian candidate, and he's afraid to tell Russia to get out of Cuba. He's afraid to tell China to get out of Cuba. He's afraid. China now is building, think of this, China is building military installations in Cuba. The Cuban population of Miami is not too happy because they're never going to be able to go back. And you don't even hear about it. And the worst culprit is the press, the media, because normally, when I first heard that China's building installations in Cuba, and installations means military installations, okay, they said just some communication. They did that on the islands with Japan. They took the island, they started this massive construction, and they told everybody, including the Japanese have to be very careful. They told everybody that this is a housing development. They're going to build a housing development. And I said, how come the runway is 20,000 feet long? Private jets need 4,000 feet. They don't need 20,000 feet. The big ones need 20,000 feet. They don't even need 20. And I looked at the runway. I said, that's the largest runway ever built, both in width and length, for housing development. There's nobody that has a plane that big that you would have a runway that's
Why is
for
China
testing.
allowed to conduct imperialism in our hemisphere?
Well, yeah, and it's far beyond Cuba. It's all over South America.
Yeah, in the Caribbean.
So we built a thing called the Panama Canal. We lost 35,000 people to the mosquito, malaria.
Yeah.
We lost 35,000 people building. We lost 35,000 people because of the mosquito. Vicious. They had to build under nets. It was one of the true great wonders of the world. As he said, one of the 9 wonders of the world. No, it was one of the 7. It happened a little while ago, It says 9 wonders of the world. You could make 9 wonders. He would have been better off if he stuck with the 9 and just said, yeah, I think it's 9. But this is one of the true 7 wonders of the world. And you take a look at the Panama Canal. It was such an incredible engineering marvel. We sold it under Jimmy Carter. We sold it to Panama for $1. The following day, they quadrupled the amount of money that ships had to pay to get across. They didn't lose one ship. And now they've made it much bigger, and now they've widened it. They've doubled it, right? They've more than doubled it. And it's one of the most profitable things. Any time it's just incredible, right? We gave it away for $1. China now controls it. They actually control the Panama Canal. They run it, they control it. And we shouldn't let that happen. And we can't let China be in Cuba. And they'll get out. If I'm president, they'll get out. Because I had a very good relationship with President Xi, but he respected this country, he respected me. And he'll get out. And we can't let them run the Panama Canal. We built the Panama Canal. Should have never been given to Panama. We should have had it. But we gave it for $1. Think of it. They quadrupled. In one day, they lifted the fees, which are, pretty big for these massive ships to go through, right? Rather than going around the Cape and through all the tremendous storms, such beauty, it's beautiful stuff. But you didn't want to get caught in those storms. Those were storms that wiped out the biggest ships. And we go through the Panama Canal, we built it, and we gave it away for $1. Think of that, how stupid are we? We have done the stupidest things in this country. And now we have a president that can't put 2 sentences together, can't speak, can't walk, can't talk. I don't think he gets to the starting gate, but these people do miracles. I mean, he ran out of his basement, and you got away with that one because of COVID, so he sort of got away with it. They cheated on the election. But you have people that are very smart, but they're fascists and they're radical left lunatics, and they're destroying our country with the all-electric cars and the windmills all over the place, which, by the way, don't work, and they're most of them made in China. For the most part, they're made in China. Germany a little bit, but China. But you look at what's happening to our country, even no voter ID. I mean, why don't they want voter ID? There's only one reason they don't want voter ID, because they want to cheat. I mean, who doesn't want, the Democrat convention, the last one, they had voter ID that was this big. It looked like a prison card. this big on their chest. You walked in, they had your picture, your this, your fingerprint, they had everything. The most incredible voter ID I've ever seen. That was to get into the Democrat National Convention. But to get in to vote, if you buy groceries, if you buy practically anything now, you have ID on a card, credit cards or otherwise.
But don't you think it's racist to have to show your ID?
Well, they probably say that. They use anything not to show ID because voter ID is pretty simple. And we could go back, and we should go back to all paper ballots, voter ID, same-day voting. You know, France did it. France had mail-in ballots, and it was terrible. Anytime you have mail-in ballots, you're going to have massive cheating on your elections. Anytime, but not just the presidential election. Anytime you have...
Isn't that the whole point of them? So
yeah.
you can cheat?
Oh, yeah, sure. It's their whole point. That's their whole point. They want to cheat, yeah. They have to cheat because their policies are so bad that if they didn't cheat, they couldn't get elected. Who wants open borders? Who wants high taxes? Who wants high interest rates? Who wants to not be able to use a gas stove or have to drive an electric car, which, you know, you have a 4-hour drive, but the car only goes an hour and a half, so you have to charge it. The happiest moment for somebody in an electric car is the first 10 minutes. In other words, you get it charged, and now for 10 minutes. The unhappiest part is the next hour because you're petrified that you're not going to be found another charger. People... I'm saying if people, I'm not knocking electric cars, they're fine. They're fine. But if people want to buy a gasoline car or a hybrid, hybrids are pretty good actually, but they should be allowed to buy, they don't want to do any of this. So right now, California's in a big brownout because their grid is a disaster. The grid all over the country is sort of a disaster, but the grid in California. And yet they want to have in a very short period of time, millions and millions of cars going off that grid essentially. It doesn't work.
So plug your car into a grid that's failing.
You should be able to buy an electric car. You know, electric cars could be fine if you drive short distances and you want to have, you know, whatever, and you have plug-ins everywhere you go. They could be fine. But you got to have gasoline cars. You got to have everything. Let people buy everything. Now there's the new thing is your heating systems in the house. They don't want you to have a modern day heating system. They want you to use a heating system that will cost you at least $10,000 to buy and won't work very well. You know, none of the stuff works as well. One of the things I did with EPA is you have states, many states, most of the states have so much water. You know, it comes out of heaven, right? The water pours down and you have it. It's there. It's got to go wherever it goes, into the oceans, whatever. It's not like a big problem. Now, in some states, they have a problem. You know, you have some desert areas and all, and for that it's okay. But they have sinks where no water comes out. You turn it on, no water comes out. No water comes out of the shower. No water is allowed to go into the washing machine for your dishes or for your clothing or what. And I avoided all of that.
Wait, they have sinks where no water comes out?
Sure, you have restrictors. When I say no water, very little water. You want to wash your hands, right?
Yeah.
And you've seen this. And you turn on the sink and it's very little. Or you want to wash your beautiful hair, right? And you're standing under a shower. Then the suds never go. If the water comes out very slowly. I'm sure you've seen this. It usually takes place in new hotels and new homes.
Yeah, you take a drill and take the
they have
limiter out.
Well, you can, but now they make it so you can't do that so easily. They have a restrictor. It's called a restrictor, and it restricts the water from coming out. So I ended all of that, and you have to see these. They let the water come out. You know what people do? They wash their hands like 5 times longer, or in the washing machine, they'll press for their. Let's say the dishwasher, they'll press it, then they'll press it about 7 or 8 times.
Yeah.
They'll end up using more water, and it still won't be very good. I met with the head of Whirlpool. They were practically going out of business during my administration, and they said to me, from Ohio, incredible, great state, I love Ohio, and they were really doing badly because people were dumping washing machines all over, mostly from South Korea, but also from China. And he was explaining it's just a terrible situation. I said, let me ask you, how's the quality? He says, we're better, but they are good enough quality. But, you know, of course he's going to say that. But, you know, they are better. He said, but they don't allow us. They're dumping these machines. They're cutting us in half. They're killing us. And on top of it, the government won't let us use water in our machines. I mean, he shows me like a quarter of a bottle of water. That's supposed to be washing clothing. And I freed it all up, and I put tariffs on these countries that were selling and the machines coming into the country. And that company went from all the washing machine companies, they make washing machines, they make dryers, they make all of the different machines that do this kind of work, including dishwashers. And they went from a disaster area to being just thriving.
But can I ask,
they love me in that part of Ohio.
Well, I bet they do, but why should EPA, no one at EPA was elected by anybody,
Yeah.
why do they have the power to decide how much water your washing machine uses? Shouldn't Congress in a democracy get to vote on that?
Yeah, you could say that. They do things that are not very...
So how do you, that's my question, how do you, if you get elected again, go back to Washington, how do you keep the agencies under control? How do you keep FBI and CIA specifically under control?
The way you do it, like I fired Comey, that was a big deal. You know, a lot of people said, and I fired him very early. Somebody said, oh, I wish you would have fired him. There was a real question about firing him anyway. You understand, because, you know, when they have a 10-year term, there is a question. I fired Comey. That was a great thing. If I didn't fire Comey, maybe I wouldn't be talking to you, or I'd be talking to you about real estate or something else other than politics, right? That was a coup, in my opinion. That was a very sick deal. That was the insurance policy. You remember the insurance policy? Oh, she's going to win, darling. She's going to win. But just in case she doesn't, we have an insurance policy. And insurance policy was what they were doing. And we caught them with that. That was a very important tweet or whatever it was, text. It was a big deal. That was a big deal. The insurance policy. She's going to win 100 million to 1. That's not good odds. At least they gave me one, right? 100 million to 1. But just in case she doesn't win, we have an insurance policy. And everybody said, that's strange. That's strange. But we caught all that because I fired Comey. Because when I fired Comey, it was like throwing a rock into a hornet's nest, into a nest of bees, and the place went crazy.
So when you were president, are you confident that you knew everything, say, CIA was doing around the world?
No, I'm not. It's a very interesting group of people. I had very good relationships, I thought, but I was a little surprised when I got out that, you know, things go on. Look, it's...
What were you surprised by?
I was surprised, I think, at some of the people. I was surprised that there was... I had a group of people. Look, we killed many, using the CIA, I have to say this, very bad actors. We were very good at it. You look at Soleimani, you look at al-Baghdadi, bigger than Osama bin Laden. I mean, Osama bin Laden, but al-Baghdadi did ISIS, and he was rebuilding ISIS very strongly.
And that was the CIA that did that?
That was really us that did that.
Yeah.
That was really us that did that. And Soleimani was us that did that, not so much CIA. But we did some very good work with the CIA. What I started, you know, when I looked at the 51 intelligence agents saying that was the laptop from hell was Russia disinformation, when I took a look at that, I said, that's a horrible thing. They knew it wasn't. They knew it was not. And by the way, you're talking about cheating on the election? McLaughlin and Fabrizio, great pollsters, if they said a thing like that plus other things meant anywhere from 10 to 17% of the vote would change.
Whatever happened to Mike Pence? You've always been nice to Pence. I've never heard you criticize Pence. You've defended him in public many, many times. He's out there attacking you. What is that?
So Mike wants to run for president. You got to understand, in my opinion, Mike Pence had the absolute right to send the votes back to the legislatures. The Democrats and everybody said, you don't have the right. In other words, what I said, is he a human conveyor belt? You mean if he finds fraud in Pennsylvania, in Georgia, in any of these states, Arizona, he has to send them to Mitch McConnell, right? That's right, sir. Well, if he finds fraud, he has to? Yes, sir. I said, so he's a conveyor belt. Boom, put him in. I said, I don't agree with that. And we had some lawyers, not all, we had some lawyers that said, no, you do have the right to send them back to the legislatures to be rechecked. Because if you looked at what went on in Wisconsin, who, by the way, now agree with me, Wisconsin has been virtually, other than the fact they're not allowed to do anything statutorily, but Wisconsin has been, I mean, what they found is incredible. I mean, we won Wisconsin. But Mike Pence had the right, in my opinion, to send them back.
Do you ever talk to him now?
No, I haven't spoken to him in a long time. I was very disappointed in him. I didn't want to do what Thomas Jefferson did. Thomas Jefferson, it was Georgia. And it was, hear ye, the great state of Georgia is not capable or allowed to tabulate their votes. And Thomas Jefferson, who was the vice president, said, is Georgia sure that they cannot tabulate their votes? Georgia is sure. He didn't send them back and have them redo it. He said, we will keep the votes of the great state of Georgia for Thomas Jefferson and his president. I didn't ask him for that. Could have done that too, but I didn't. I thought that would be turmoil. I asked him to send them back to his legislature, to the legislatures, you know, in Wisconsin, let's say.
But why didn't he? I mean, you'd worked together for 4 years. You're the president. He's VP. You say you're aligned on everything.
I think he got very bad advice. I really do. Now, let me tell you what happened. I sat there with a few people. I think his lawyer was in the room too. His lawyer was very much against it. There were other lawyers that felt you could do it. It was one of those things. I think you could have done it. I think you can always do something if you see fraud or if you see problems. But it's very interesting. So after the election was over, the rhinos got together with the Democrats and they redid the election, so you couldn't do it anymore. So then I called the people. I said, so in other words, you're saying I was right. You could do it. Yes, you could do it. In other words, they took the Voting Act and they redid it so the vice president no longer has the power to do what I said he could do. So when that happened, I said, wow. And you know, you'd look some of these Democrats in the eye and they'd say, he has absolutely no right to do it. And immediately after the election, they met rhinos, could name them all, and Democrats, and they approved legislation that takes away the right of the vice president to do it. So I said, so you're saying I was right. The vice president did have the right to do it, and they said, yes, he did.
So if you're saying they stole it from you last time, why wouldn't they do the same this time?
Oh, well, they'll try. They're going to be trying, yeah. And not only me, you know. Look, DeSantis is out. I think he's gone. So he was at a level. People have figured him out. He's gone. But if somebody else got in, other than me, they'll go at him just as viciously as they did me. These people are sick. They will go after them. And a lot of people say they won't be able to hold up. I do get credit for holding up quite well, I must tell you. I think it's...
How do you do that? How do you get indicted, you know, every week and stay cheerful?
I think it's a lot easier because I'm so high in the polls, because it means the people get it. The people see it's a fraud. The people see it. Like this horrible district attorney from just a little while ago, from essentially Atlanta, that's Fulton County. She said, basically, I don't have any right to challenge an election. Well, what about Stacey Abrams? What about Hillary Clinton? What about all of these Democrats that are still challenging my election? The same people that are saying he's challenging an election challenged my election. And they did it with slates. They did it with all sorts of things. They were very bad about it. But basically, they're suing me and they're saying you don't have any right to challenge it. If you challenge an election, we're going to indict you and put you in jail. So what they're doing is they've weaponized, and don't kid yourself, the DOJ and Biden and the whole group, they're watching all of this stuff. They love the local stuff. You know, the DA in Manhattan. Not only that, they put one of the DOJ top people into the Manhattan DA's office to run things. They don't even have a case against me. It's not even a case. Everyone says, even the Democrats say, you can't bring these cases. You have no case. The Attorney General or the District Attorney, Fannie Willis, in Atlanta, she's getting killed. Basically, she's saying Trump doesn't have the right to criticize an election. But you've been around long enough now. You've seen many elections criticized. I mean, Hillary Clinton goes crazy. Every time she talks, she says, he's not the president. Jimmy Carter said, he's not the president. Well, I am the president. Hillary Clinton called me, by the way, at 3:02 in the morning to congratulate me the night of the election.
Did her voice crack?
Well, her voice was, it's very different, I will say. I won't get into that. But
what do you mean?
Her voice was very different. Don't forget, they were all celebrating at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I came home and I said, you know, I think we won. I felt we won because the rallies are so big. You know, we'd go to Wisconsin and we'd go to Georgia. We'd go to different states and Michigan. we'd have rallies in Pennsylvania. We had 58,000 people in Butler. And I said, how are we losing this? How do you have a rally where you have from 50 to 100,000 people, many of them? I did 7 a day for a couple of days. That's a lot. That's a lot. These are big rallies too. And I didn't hold back. I didn't say, let's make them let's do abbreviations, right? But they challenged the stuff. Yeah. Hillary called me up and conceded. Now the word is that Obama said you have to do that. But she called up and totally conceded. But now, every time you see her on television, she's saying she's challenging the election.
Do you think...
So that would mean that she should be indicted, but that would mean also that Stacey Abrams in Georgia should be indicted, because she still thinks she won the election for governor. She still thinks that. She's never recanted. And
do you think Stacey Abrams will be indicted for that?
No, of course not. She won't be. The Democrats don't get indicted for things like that. They don't get impeached. No, it's a different thing. With that being said,
yes,
I had great support when they did impeachment hoax #1 and impeachment hoax #2. Jim Jordan. The House was fantastic. And actually the Senate was very good for me, other than, Mitch McConnell. I think it's too bad I endorsed him. He was begging. He was going to lose that race, and I endorsed him, and he ended up winning the race because of my endorsement. He was down. He was going to lose to Amy McGrath. She was $90 million in cash, all set to go. She was leading by 3. He was going down. I did him a favor, and then 3-4 months later, he really wanted to impeach me. He's a bad guy. But if you look at what's going on politically, it's so interesting. The level of loyalty is different in politics than it is in normal life, I will say. With that being said, I've had great loyalty also. But the House was fantastic. The Senate was very good. They overrode Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell, in my opinion, was trying to get senators to impeach me, especially for the second one. And on the first one, he acted very, very slow. He should have gone much faster. But Mitch McConnell wanted to, and the senators went up to him, guys that are subservient to him because he gives money. He gives them money. He gives them a lot of money. He raises some money and he gives it to them, and therefore they do what he said. That's the only form of leadership he's got.
So last question. If you're elected president again, what's your number one priority? When you ran last time, you said, I will build a wall. This time, your bottom line top promise to the country.
So you can do numerous things at the same time.
Of course.
But let's say number one is a border, and taking hundreds of thousands of criminals that have been allowed into our country and getting them out and bringing them back to their country, Guatemala. By the way, not only the 4 countries that we think of as neighbors, all over the world. Last month, we had 149 countries represented. Think of it. We had 149 countries represented, Tucker, from places that many people never even heard of, coming into our country. And they're coming in from mental institutions, and they're coming in from prisons. They're emptying out their prisons all over South America. They're emptying out their mental institutions. Terrorists are pouring into our country. We have no idea. I had the strongest border in the history of our country, and I built almost 500 miles of wall. They like to say, oh, was it less? No. I built 500 miles. In fact, if you check with the authorities on the border, we built almost 500 miles of wall, and I had another 200 that I was going to build. It's like water. It seeks. And we're going to build another 200. We built it. It was all set to go. All they had to do was install it. It would have taken 3 weeks. And that's when I found out. I said, I think these people actually want open borders. The first thing I would do would be I would seal up the border good and tight, except for people that want to come in legally.
Do you think we're moving towards civil war?
There's tremendous passion and there's tremendous love. January 6th was a very interesting day because they don't report it properly. I believe it was the largest crowd I've ever spoken before. And some of the crowds I've spoken before. And like July 4th on the mall, I think they had 1 million people there. But I think that the biggest crowd I've ever spoken before was on January 6th. And people that were in that crowd, a very, very small group of people, and we said patriotically and peacefully and patriotically, right? Nobody ever says that. Go peacefully and patriotically. But people that were in that crowd that day, very small group of people, went down there, and then there are a lot of scenarios that we can talk about. But people in that crowd said it was the most beautiful day they've ever experienced. There was love in that crowd. There was love and unity. I have never seen such spirit and such passion and such love. And I've also never seen simultaneously and from the same people such hatred of what they've done to our country.
So do you think it's possible that there's open conflict? We seem to be moving towards something.
I don't know, because I don't know what it, I can say this. There's a level of passion that I've never seen. There's a level of hatred that I've never seen, and that's probably a bad combination.
Donald Trump, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very much.
Thank you.
That is a bad combination, by the way.
Bad combination.
Tucker Carlson tonight, they always accuse you of the very things they're doing themselves. If there's one rule you can keep on your fridge, write it down, put it in your wallet to evaluate the behavior of the people in charge, it's that. They blame you for their sins every single time. The latest example arrived this week when we learned that Joe Biden, fresh from lecturing us about how Donald Trump is a criminal because he had unauthorized possession of secret documents, that very same Joe Biden himself had unauthorized possession of secret documents. But don't worry, it's not a big deal. Unlike you and that despicably orange Donald Trump, Joe Biden is a good person. Joe Biden is so virtuous he has transcended temporal law. It's not a crime when he does it. So that's the frustratingly familiar headline from this week's story, which you've probably seen by now. But the details of the story are actually pretty interesting. So a week before these last midterm elections, Joe Biden's lawyers were for some reason rooting around in a locked closet in the Washington office of something called the Penn Biden Center for Diplomacy and Global Engagement. And while in that locked closet, Biden's lawyers found a sheaf of highly classified government documents. So the first question here is, why were Joe Biden's lawyers doing this in the first place? And we can't say for sure because they haven't told us, but it is weird. Lawyers don't typically search locked closets. Yours probably don't. But Biden's lawyers did. And we'd guess they did because they understood that Republicans were about to win back the House, and with it, congressional subpoena power. So they were likely conducting a cleanup operation preemptively, trying to get ahead of a scandal they knew was coming. And of course, they hid what they found in that closet until after the midterm elections because there's no reason to influence voters too much with information. So there's that. And then there's the question of the so-called Penn Biden Center at the University of Pennsylvania. What is that exactly? The whole idea of an academic Biden Center is pretty funny. Joe Biden is a moron. He's always been a moron, even before the dementia. For decades in Washington, ask anyone who lived there, Biden was famous as the dumbest member of the Senate. People made jokes about it. So why would an Ivy League university name a think tank after a man who can't think and then pay him nearly $1 million a year for not doing anything? Good question. We'll have more on that in just a minute. But first, a word about classified documents. Now, this is not a partisan point, not attacking anybody, it's just the truth. These people you see on television huffing and puffing about vital state secrets, on both sides, by the way, not just Democrats, everybody, vital state secrets, they're either lying or they don't really understand how Washington works. How many legitimate vital state secrets are there? Well, actually not very many at all. In a democracy, the government has no right to hide what it's doing from the public, except under extraordinary circumstances. It's fine to classify the Normandy invasion until it happens. It is not fine to spend 60 years hiding the fact that the CIA was involved in the murder of a president. Hiding your involvement in the Kennedy assassination is not a national security precaution. It is criminal behavior. And it's made possible by a classification regime that was designed not to protect this country, but to protect and enrich our permanent political class, which it very efficiently does. Oh, but our enemies, screeched the morons on TV. If we declassify these documents, whatever they are, if we do that, our enemies will learn our secrets. Please. China already knows our secrets, all of our secrets. The Chinese government has hacked every agency in Washington, and everybody knows that, and nobody seems to care. The Biden administration cares so little, in fact, it just suspended a counter-espionage program designed to stop Chinese spying. In other words, the Chinese can know, but you can't know. Biden trusts Beijing more than he trusts you. So the media's job, its only job, really, is to push back against attitudes like that and to seek the truth. Reporters are the people who are paid, who for a living find out what your government is doing and then tell you about it, so democracy can continue. But there are very few of those left. Julian Assange is in prison for his efforts. Ed Snowden lives in exile. And the news organizations that remain are so thoroughly controlled by government agencies that even the suggestion of more public transparency drives them to hysteria. Watch CNN and MSNBC, for example, react to the news that Republicans in Congress might tell us some of what the thoroughly corrupt intel community has been doing in our name.
A House committee where Republicans can shred at the integrity of the federal government and tell America that your government is spying on you and coming after you, that is at the heart of this tear down, break down the government. We can't trust the government. We're going to topple it. He just gave them a committee platform to have those hearings. And you better believe that is going to be heroin in the veins of Fox News viewers over the next 2 years.
Basically, they're establishing a subcommittee or a committee on witch hunts and deep state conspiracy theories.
This is so extraordinarily dangerous. As you said, they're going to actually, these people want to target America's intel community.
This is a body that, of the Congress that we are trying to maintain credibility with, and we are not going to do that by opening up all kinds of suspicions about the institutions in our society.
It's outrageous to tell people the government is spying on them, especially since the government is spying on them. That's confirmed, by the way. That's a fact. They spied on us. But if you want to know what your government is doing, scolds Joe Scarborough, you're, quote, targeting America's intel community. You're unpatriotic. You're a disloyal American if you don't want to be lied to. That's what they're saying out loud on MSNBC tonight. In the past few months, we've learned that for years, Twitter functioned as a mouthpiece for the FBI and the spy agencies. Clearly, the same thing has happened to cable news. And that is a graver threat to our democracy than any group of Trump voters who wandered around the Capitol on January 6th. It's not even close. But back to our story and the hilariously obvious double standard on the question of classified documents. It was just this summer that NBC's hyperventilating House historian Michael Beschloss suggested that Donald Trump deserved the death penalty for keeping classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, fried like the Rosenbergs in the electric chair. Former CIA Director Michael Hayden agreed. Sounds about right, Hayden wrote, because at this point it's totally normal for CIA directors to fantasize about killing American presidents. So just for fun today, we reached out to Michael Beschloss to ask what punishment he thinks Joe Biden deserves for keeping classified documents in his office. Of course, Beschloss didn't respond to us. He was too busy applying pancake makeup in his living room for another MSNBC hit. But to be fair, it wasn't just Michael Beschloss who claimed that Trump was endangering America with those documents. They all said that. Watch.
The seriousness of the potential threat to national security information, I just don't know what to say.
If he was in possession of classified documents, those are by definition potentially harmful to our national security.
We have a president of the United States who has played fast and loose with the national security.
We have a situation where what he was doing was dangerous to our national security.
These are really classified and a really threat to national security.
That really jumps out to me as a national security threat.
This is a national security crisis.
The extreme risk that Trump was willing to take with our national security.
The funniest part was Bernstein, formerly the Washington Post, who literally participated in an FBI operation, not guessing, documented, an FBI operation to drive a sitting duly elected president from office. Carl Bernstein participated in that, and he's lecturing us about how, no, we have to keep the secret things secret. So last night we learned that Joe Biden, someone with no power to declassify anything when he was vice president, stashed classified documents in the closet of his private office at the very same time he was sending the DOJ after Donald Trump for doing the same thing. So how exactly are our news media going to make sense of this? Well, of course, with maximum shamelessness. Today, CNN trotted out a CIA lawyer called Brian Greer to explain that mishandling classified information is no longer a big deal. In fact, honestly, kids, it happens all the time.
Almost any mishandling case could potentially be shoehorned into a criminal investigation. But going back to my prior point, because this type of mishandling happens all the time, and now it's become such a political football with all three last presidential candidates being investigated, I do worry about, while we need to take this all seriously and it needs to be investigated, I do worry about over-criminalizing it, launching these full investigations that become political footballs is dangerous because it can disincentivize people from serving in the federal government. But we do want to incentivize them again to do the right thing, which is report it when it happens, and not to do the wrong thing, which is to conceal and obstruct, which is what Trump did.
Some of us who've worked in cable news for the past 25 years can affirm it wasn't always the case that every time you flipped on the tube, there was some CIA or NSA or FBI employee telling you what the truth is, because news organizations used to assume that if someone was paid to lie for the government, they probably weren't a reliable oracle on TV. They probably weren't telling the truth to viewers. But now it's the norm. So the CIA lawyer you just saw, Brian Greer, was telling us just a few months ago that Donald Trump, by doing the same thing that Biden did, endangered, quote, national security. The intelligence agencies, Greer said, quote, have no choice but to assume a compromise and take proactive measures to protect our sources and collection capabilities. That was then, like August. Now he's telling you this kind of thing happens all the time. Just calm down, calm down. The rest of the news media has been every bit as brazen. The Washington Post just reported that, quote, the case will likely draw comparisons to Mar-a-Lago, but appears to be quite different. Really, how is it quite different? By the way, every news source is telling us there were 10 documents found. How do they know that? Well, of course, they don't know that. They have no idea how many documents were found. They're just taking Biden's lawyer's word for it. That's not news collection. That's press release writing. But you will see identical articles in Forbes and Business Insider and The Hill, the usual places, all repeating the same scripted talking point. Now, in one sense, what those outlets are telling you is true. Joe Biden, we learned today, was not holding on to the kind of cocktail napkins found at Mar-a-Lago. He had actual classified information about a bunch of countries, including Ukraine, from his time as vice president. Why? Why is it always about Ukraine? What is going on in Ukraine? Don't talk about the biolabs. What is that? Why the obsession with Ukraine going back long before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, going back many years? Well, in this case, it turns out that 3 days before Joe Biden left his job as vice president in January of 2017, the Ukrainians were also a little bit confused about the focus on their country. In mid-January 2017, State Department officials circulated a report from Ukrinform, that's the Ukraine state media organization, and the report said this, and we're quoting, literally on the last days of his term, the U.S. Vice President Joe Biden is going to Kiev. How can we explain this attention to us? So even the Ukrainians were confused. Why is the President of the United States, the world's richest country, spending so much of his life focused on Europe's poorest country, Ukraine? What's going on? Well, here's one explanation. At the same moment that Joe Biden was visiting Ukraine as his last official act, his drug-addicted son, Hunter, was still making tens of thousands of dollars a month in a no-show job on the board of Burisma, the largest gas company in Ukraine. Natural gas, something Hunter Biden knew nothing about. Hunter Biden would hold that fake job until 2019. So is there a connection, just guessing here, between the fact that his son was getting rich from Ukraine for a no-show job and Joe Biden's 2017 trip to Ukraine on Air Force Two at your expense? You'd think there might be a connection, but so far no one in Washington has thought to really press that point because they're still upset about Trump. They're still talking about Trump and his crimes. Watch Joe Biden from this past September explain why he supported the DOJ raid on Mar-a-Lago. And here's a hint, because it's, quote, totally irresponsible for government officials to keep classified documents after leaving office.
When you saw the photograph of the top secret documents laid out on the floor at Mar-a-Lago, what did you think to yourself, looking at that image?
How that could possibly happen. How anyone could be that irresponsible. And I thought, what data was in there that may compromise sources and methods? By that I mean names of people who helped, or et cetera. And it's just totally irresponsible.
So they seem like hypocrites. We could play an endless loop of clips like that for the rest of the hour. You get the point, but they're not actually hypocrites. What they're describing is a caste system where they can do what they want and you are subject to the minutia of their legal code. It's called anarcho-tyranny. But on to more enduring questions, because we know that already. What is this Penn Biden Center? The Penn Biden Center. What's the purpose of the Penn Biden Center? Well, in April of 2016, one of Hunter Biden's business associates explained the purpose in an email to Hunter. He said that the Penn Biden Center, quote, operates like the Clinton Global Initiative without the money raise. Oh, so all the upside, none of the downside. Without the money raise, really. So you don't have to fly around the world raising money. But as the Washington Free Beacon has reported, actually there was a lot of money being raised, and it was being raised by the University of Pennsylvania, and it was being raised from foreign governments after the Biden Center opened. See the connection here? And we're quoting from the piece. Foreign contributions to the University of Pennsylvania tripled since the Penn Biden Center's soft opening in March of 2017, rising from $31 million in 2016 to over $100 million in 2019. Now, where'd all that money come from? Where do you think? The largest foreign contributor was China. And if you go to the web page for the Penn Biden Center, you get some idea of what that money bought. So on the site, there's a section called, quote, addressing threats to the liberal international order. Russia and Vladimir Putin are mentioned as threats to the liberal international order, but China, which is currently committing genocide, is conspicuously not mentioned as a threat to the liberal international order. So all of this aroused our suspicions naturally, so we decided to take a closer look at the University of Pennsylvania and its ties to China. We took a look at text messages from Hunter Biden's laptop to see if we could find an answer. And we found messages between a senior professor at Penn's International Relations Department to Naomi Biden, that would be Hunter Biden's very young daughter. The message from the professor begins this way, quote, Dear Naomi, I'm writing you tonight to invite you to take part in a major conference in China at the end of March. I've been asked to help recruit a prominent young leader. They, the Chinese government, will fly you business class and, of course, provide all of your accommodations. I don't think it would surprise you that they are interested in you thanks to your family name. I would not take offense at that. It is truly the Chinese way. And frankly, better you than that dolt, Tiffany Trump. If you are interested, can you send me your CV and or a bio? I would forward that, and you could expect an official invitation from Li Baodong, the Secretary General of the Forum. End quote. Pretty remarkable. As far as we know, that has not been previously reported. So here you have an employee of the University of Pennsylvania, an Ivy League school, sending an invitation apparently on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party to recruit Joe Biden's granddaughter for an influence operation, saying that she'd be flown to Beijing and stay in Chinese government-controlled accommodations. So a lot of people on television seem very concerned about national security at the moment. All these former CIA and NSA and FBI employees are going on CNN and MSNBC to tell you national security implications are first in mind. Are they concerned about this? Will they ask a single question about it? Of course they won't. So tonight we're going to begin by asking fact-based questions about those classified materials that Joe Biden apparently had at the Penn Biden Center and what they tell us. For that, we begin tonight with Fox Business's Hillary Vaughn. She is outside the Penn Biden Center office in Washington right now. She joins us. Hillary, thanks for coming on. What do you know?
Thanks, Tucker. Well, the Penn Biden Center is just a normal office building. It's on the same block as Charlie Palmer Steak, which is a popular after-work watering hole for Republicans and Democrats because it's just steps away from Capitol Hill, where today we tried to talk with House Democrats about whether or not they think the president being caught with classified documents in his old office is a big deal or not. But not everyone was feeling chatty.
Do you have any comment on President Biden keeping classified documents?
But Pelosi just a few months ago had a lot to say about former President Trump's top secret stash at Mar-a-Lago.
Believe in the rule of law, and that's what our country is about, and no person is above the law, not even the President of the United States, not even a former President of the United States.
We did talk to some Democrats who are downplaying the whole thing and defending Biden.
So they said they found them there.
Right. Do you think that poses a national security threat?
No.
Why not?
Because I don't think so.
Some Democrats, though, are waiting to see what the DOJ will say.
Does it bother you that classified documents were found at President Biden's old office?
You know, I know this is an emerging issue. It's been referred to the DOJ.
So, Tucker, some lawmakers were unbothered, others were backing Biden, and some were just caught mid-bite, too busy to give us a soundbite. Tucker?
Hillary Vaughn, that was such a great report, I can barely stand it. You made my night. Thank you so much for that.
Thanks.
Thank you. Miranda Devine is a New York Post columnist and really the world's authority on Hunter Biden's laptop, author of Laptop from Hell. She joins us with a reaction to all of this. Miranda, you've been on parts of this story for years now. What do you make of this?
Well, it just looks like projection from Joe Biden, doesn't it? As usual, it's the Democrats' tool of trade to accuse their opponents of the very sins that they are committing. It's a little obvious in this case now, and you just wonder why it's come out and really what the true story is about these confidential documents. But as far as the University of Pennsylvania goes, there's a long, incestuous, symbiotic relationship with the Bidens. Joe Biden, he got his grandchildren in there, he got the children of friends in there. He treated it as his own little playpen. And of course, when he stepped down from being vice president, he was paid almost $1 million by the University of Pennsylvania. He put his name on that supposed think tank. And in return, I suppose, his name attracted a lot of Chinese money. As you just said, there was, the amount of money that came in from China to the university after Joe Biden opened that think tank, almost quadrupled. It went from about 20 million to over 70, almost 75 million. So that you have to look at a quid pro quo there. And then you talk about Naomi Biden, Joe Biden's granddaughter, the oldest daughter of Hunter Biden, and just this very casual offer from a Penn professor of this propaganda tour sponsored and paid for by the Chinese Communist Party with business class tickets. And she asked Hunter what he thought, and he said, go for it and ask for 2 tickets so you can bring your boyfriend. It's apprentice griftership.
It's just beyond belief and happening out in public. But of course you know that because you've been dealing with this for years. Miranda Devine of the New York Post. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
So the hallmark of totalitarianism is a government or political party controlling the details of your life, the intimate details, like what you cook your dinner on. So with that in mind, the Biden administration is considering a ban on gas stoves in the name of climate, but really it's for your own good. If America puts up with this, probably put up with anything, which is something we're thinking about. We've got more details straight ahead. Plus, new medical guidance for obese children, apparently written by the pharmaceutical companies. More on that story next. A lot of politicians, you may have noticed, mistake themselves for God and decide they can control the intimate details of your life, including what kind of stove you use to cook your dinner. And politicians have been telling us for a long time, because of climate, you're not allowed to have a gas stove. But that doesn't make sense to people, because if they really cared about carbon emissions, they probably wouldn't be flying in private planes or blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, which they did. So now they have a new tack to get rid of gas stoves. The Consumer Product Safety Commission is deciding on whether to ban gas stoves totally because of safety. Safety? We've had these stoves for over 100 years. It's totally fine to give fentanyl to addicts, but a gas stove is a threat to your life? Right. So there are people in this world who use gas stoves for a living, and one of them is Stratus Morfogen, who owns a restaurant. He's the author of Be a Disruptor. He joins us to assess. Stratus, thanks so much for coming on. So you're a restaurant owner. This is not a luxury item to you. This is core to your business. First of all, would you obey a ban on gas stoves? And second, why are they superior to electric?
You know what it is, Tucker? For people that don't understand the restaurant industry, for 35 years, we've been attacked by everybody. We had organized crime in our industry in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. In the 2000s, we had corrupt Wall Street. And for the last 3 years, we've had government overreach. I mean, we've seen it during COVID. They did things, they never followed the science. And what's going on, what I heard the rumor about this last year. And what I'm hearing about today from the White House to Governor Hochul, that they want to make us, for new restaurant construction, use electric stoves. So let me explain it to you. We lose 40% productivity by using electric. by using electric, if they ever inquired with small business owners, I'll give them 3 pieces of advice. Get stronger filtration system, get a hood system that works, and basically train your staff on how to maintain it. But for 35 years, we continuously have obstacles in running our industry. And I got to tell you, Tucker, and I want to thank you for supporting small business. Since the last time I was on, you inspired me to write the book. And I got to tell you, because our journey is constantly being attacked, like we're vulnerable. And this is creme de la creme. Because I will tell you, this will destroy our industry just as bad as they attempted to do with COVID.
I mean, there's got to be a limit to what people are going to put up with. There has to be a red line. I would counsel mass disobedience in the face of tyranny in this case. I mean, do you think restaurant owners would obey? Why does Kathy Hochul have a right to tell you what kind of stove you have? She's an idiot.
Yeah, listen, I didn't obey Kathy Hochul with any of the mandates.
Good.
And I'm not going to obey Kathy Hochul now, because let me tell you something. With electric stoves, first of all, our bills will go 6 times higher. And then on top of that, our productivity drops. This isn't just going to hurt the restaurant hospitality industry. It's going to hurt real estate development. You remember, casinos, shopping malls, airports, residential towers, office buildings, they depend on us for the content. And if we don't develop the content for these big, this is our industry, for these big developers, well, guess what? This whole thing will collapse. They're not following science, and this is not following science. There are so many other ways, like we do. We don't allow our cooks to basically stand and smoke. We have a strong filtration, smoke evacuation system. And this is what's needed if they want to go down this route.
The idea that people who send crack pipes to drug addicts are concerned about safety is like the most hilarious thing I've ever heard in my life. Ignore them, please. Travis Morfogen, great to see you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tucker.
Well, here's kind of an amazing story. So the American Academy of Pediatrics, which if you got kids, you kind of trust, apparently, has issued new guidance on obesity. And you don't want to think that any medical association exists to make money for drug companies. But you have to kind of wonder, in light of the American Academy of Pediatrics' new guidelines for childhood obesity. Now, anyone who's tried to lose weight, we can speak to this directly, knows stop eating a lot of sugary food and you'll probably lose weight. But that's not the guidance. They're saying the kids as young as 13 years old should take weight loss medication and potentially undergo surgery for children. Dr. Mark Siegel joins us tonight to assess this. Hey, doctor.
Tucker, this is the first time they've put out guidelines on obesity in 15 years, with 15 million children from 2 to 19 obese. But that's before the pandemic. And these guidelines do read like panic. And you know me, clinical practice guidelines, I don't follow rigidly any clinical practice guidelines, period. I don't doctor by the numbers. I listen to the patient. I don't fat shame, by the way. I talk to patients. I listen to what they're sensitive to. I want to know what their concerns are. Are you depressed? Why are you eating so much? Are you sedentary? Guess what the pandemic did? Took kids away from schools where they had nutrition programs, locked them down where they lie on the couch all day, no exercise, you're not allowed to go out. Well, guess what now happens? They're burgeoning in weight. So what do they do now? They knee-jerk a solution. I know, we'll give you a pill. Oh, that doesn't work? We'll do surgery that might have long-term complications to it. Why don't we do that? Well, I have a prescription instead of all of that. I want to acknowledge that, and I want to go back to the beginning. I have my own guidelines, Dr. Siegel's guidelines. You introduce vegetables to your diet, you introduce it to your kid's diet. You go on a walk, you take your kid on a walk. You have them exercise. You ride a bike, you have them ride a bike. And then you challenge them at the end of the night, Tucker. You say, watch Tucker Carlson tonight and see if it challenges your brain. Tucker?
Yeah. I mean, getting rid of pizza and Oreos, speaking for myself, I do love. I mean, that kind of goes a long way. Like, why not just say that? I mean, it's so nuts.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Pizza and Oreos.
Yes, it does. And exercise.
Yeah. Dr. Mark Siegel, thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.
We're strongly for pets, as we often say. Even emotional support pets. Those are real. I mean, why not? Everything else is real, right? But one woman just found out that there is a limit to what qualifies as an emotional support pet. Hit a 4-foot-long boa constrictor on a commercial aircraft, and hilarity ensued. We'll explain after the break. become so unpleasant that some travelers have begun bringing emotional support animals onto airplanes, and that's understandable. But what qualifies as an emotional support animal? Well, one woman decided to test the limits recently at Tampa Airport. She stuffed her 4-foot snake inside her carry-on bag. She said it was for emotional support. TSA was not convinced. There it is. So the snake did not make it onto the plane, and this scene was avoided. Well, in 2021, dozens of churches were torched by anti-Christian extremists across Canada. Something similar has been happening in this country. Last year, pro-abortion activists attacked several churches, and earlier this month, an arsonist torched a Korean church in Portland, Oregon. But it's not just churches that are being hit. There's not been a lot of coverage of this. But our power grid has been under attack in a lot of different places, and the motives remain unclear, though you can probably guess. Andy Ngo has been covering all of this. He's the author of Unmasked, Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. He joins us tonight. Andy, thanks so much for coming on. So,
my pleasure.
This church, I don't know if we have footage of it, but you put it up online. It was pretty shocking. How much coverage, they just burned this church down, this Korean church. How much, there it is, how much coverage did that get?
It got a bit of coverage locally because it's happened in downtown. It's one of the few remaining, was a historic church in Portland. It was completely destroyed in the fire. It was 117 years old, and what remained of it was destroyed by the city because it was at risk of collapsing and potentially injuring people nearby. In my reporting, I reported out that the suspect, the arson suspect, is a trans woman who's from the New England area. Last address was in Rhode Island, and she allegedly told investigators that she has a history of mental health issues and her voice is in her head to burn down the church. The tragic destruction of the church is really just one small part of the day-to-day human misery that is playing out on the streets of Portland and Seattle and San Francisco, LA, because of failed leadership regarding the homelessness crisis. In Portland, we have a whole homelessness industrial complex where literally hundreds of millions of dollars is spent every year enriching these so-called nonprofit groups that are tasked with helping, allegedly, the homeless, but instead create conditions where people from all over the country are attracted to these cities, and there's never any expectation that they better themselves or their new communities.
No, of course they make it much worse. And thank you. We're going to stay on that power grid story, which is fascinating and mysterious and bad. Great to see you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
So in the middle of the biggest public health crisis in our lifetimes, news organizations did the opposite from what they should be doing. They censored true and useful information about COVID. But none of these outlets has been held accountable. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is trying to change that with a new lawsuit he is filing. He joins us next to explain what it is. You may not have heard of something called the Trusted News Initiative, but you should know about it. It's a major tool of information control in the United States. It's a partnership of several big news outlets, the AP, Reuters, the Washington Post, aligned with big tech companies like Facebook and Google. The BBC founded it. Now, the group has admitted its mission is to stop, quote, the tidal wave of unchecked reporting that's being piped through mainly digital platforms. In other words, we have a monopoly on telling lies, no one else can talk. And in service of that goal, the initiative has censored an awful lot of people, including Robert F. Kennedy Jr., whom history will vindicate completely. Now, Kennedy and several other plaintiffs are suing the Trusted News Initiative. We asked these news organizations about the lawsuit. Reuters says they haven't seen the lawsuit, but they're very upset by it. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is chairman and chief litigation counsel of Children's Health Defense, and we are honored to have him join us tonight. Bobby, thanks so much for coming on. Tell us what this suit seeks to do, if you don't mind.
Thank you for Tucker. Well, you and I know that from the Twitter files and that other information that's being released that the White House and other government agencies were colluding with the social media sites and with other news organizations to censor criticism of government policies. This is something different. The Trusted News Initiative was a secretive cartel that involved the big legacy media companies that you mentioned, the Associated Press, Reuters, the Washington Post, and the BBC, and also the social media platforms, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, and Twitter. And it was an agreement that had two purposes. One was to suppress and censor any information, whether true or not, that departed from official government orthodoxies and government proclamations. I think probably the more motivating purpose of the cartel was revealed in one of the memos that we have obtained from BBC, which is to destroy their rivals in the independent media. The BBC memo says to the other groups, and it was BBC, which is a British government-owned news network, and it was the one that orchestrated this secret collaboration, anti-competitive collaboration. And what they said is, although we are ostensibly all rivals and competitors with each other, the existential threat to all of our business models comes from thousands of independent news sites who are now not only providing all this content that people are reading, but they're also diminishing trust in our organizations. And the way that we can destroy them, they called stamp them out and choke them. In this memo, they use those phrases, is to deny them platforms on the social media sites, because those platforms, the viral movement of these news stories is critical for the business models of those smaller news providers. So what they said is anybody who departs from the trusted news, which is the official government narratives of WHO, CDC, and the White House, and Anthony Fauci and NIH, we will make sure to identify them and to make sure that they are not given a platform. And again, Tucker, this had nothing to do with whether the statements were inaccurate. They use the word misinformation, and they acknowledge this throughout as a euphemism for any statement that departs from official government orthodoxies.
So that's the point right there. They were censoring things that were true, and that's when you cross into criminal propaganda, in my opinion. And we're rooting for you in this lawsuit and otherwise tonight. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you very much, Tucker.
We'll be right back. Into the new woke M&M. It's an obese M&M who hectors you about diversity. We're not quite done with our investigation. We'll bring it to you later in the week. Also, we had an amazing hour-long interview today with one of the great baseball players of all time, and a great guy, by the way, Keith Hernandez. That's on Fox Nation. You can see it tomorrow morning, and we'd highly recommend it. As for this show, we'll be back tomorrow, as always, 8 p.m. Have the best night with the ones you love. Sean Hannity follows this show. Funny how huge history-altering events can take place in this country and around the world, and most people seem to have no idea they happened. It's not that Americans are stupid, it's that our media outlets, often under direct pressure from the U.S. government, suppress those stories, the stories that matter. The effect of this arrangement, and by the way, it's the intended effect, is to leave the population of the United States dangerously ignorant on questions that affect their lives. At this point, you have to wonder if the average, say, New Yorker is really better informed than a factory worker in Pyongyang, North Korea. Probably not. Both have been effectively blindfolded by information monopolies. And if you doubt that's true, ask your neighbors who's winning the war in Ukraine. And of course, they'll tell you that Ukraine is winning. Duh. That's what they've seen on the Today Show every morning for the past 11 months. And not just on the Today Show, but on virtually every media outlet in America, apart from Colonel Doug McGregor's appearances on this show, for which he has, needless to say, been condemned as an agent of Putin. But he's pretty much alone. Here's the version that most Americans see.
President Zelensky described the time as the beginning of the end of the war. Does he have that right?
Well, I think it's clear that Ukraine is winning.
The Ukrainians are on the offensive. They're winning this war right now. Why would you want to stop supporting the Ukrainians when they are winning on the battlefield?
Ukraine is winning, but they haven't won, and Russia is losing, but they have not lost.
Right now, I think it's fair to say Ukraine has the upper hand. Ukraine is winning its war thanks to the enormous support we and others have provided, and we need to keep the pressure on Putin.
Well, that was just last month. I think it's clear that Ukraine is winning, says defense contractor Barry McCaffrey, with what sounds like hard-earned authority. Ukraine is winning, says Michael McFaul of Stanford University. Ukraine is winning, says Hillary Clinton. Ukraine is winning, proclaimed the entire American media establishment, and anyone who suggests otherwise must be working for Russia. That's what they've been telling you relentlessly because they want you to think we're on the winning team. And most Americans believe them because how could they know otherwise? They don't have sources in Ukraine. So you can imagine the shock that Washington Post readers must have experienced this weekend when they read the op-ed by Robert Gates and Condoleezza Rice. Now, if you're trying to locate the two most thoroughly discredited figures in the American foreign policy establishment, you'd probably pick Bob Gates and Condi Rice, because few have done more to weaken this country. But again, most Americans don't know that because the media would never say that, ever, because Gates and Rice are paid-up members of the club. And Gates and Rice want you to know in their op-ed in the Post that Ukraine is losing badly. In fact, they write, unless the U.S. continues to prop up Ukraine's military and economy forever and fight Russia directly, that country will collapse and Putin could invade Malibu. Here we're quoting directly. Ukraine's economy is in a shambles. Millions of its people have fled, its infrastructure is being destroyed, and much of its mineral wealth, industrial capacity, and considerable agricultural land are under Russian control. Ukraine's military capability and economy are now entirely dependent on lifelines from the West, primarily the United States. End quote. Wait, what? Isn't that the opposite, the direct opposite of what you just saw, of what they've been telling all of us until, say, last week? Indeed, it is the opposite. Shouldn't we have known these facts, before Mitch McConnell signed off on yet another multi-billion-dollar aid package to Zelensky and his wife? Yep, we should have known, but there was no way to know because the media wouldn't tell us. And they wouldn't tell us because they're controlled. And Ukraine is not the only war they have been lying about. How about Mexico? There's a full-blown civil war underway tonight 100 yards from San Diego. The Mexican government has lost control of parts of its own country to the armies of the drug cartels, which are now powerful enough to threaten commercial air travel in Mexico. At least 150,000 people have died in this war so far. How many is that? Well, that's more than twice the number of deaths that the U.S. suffered during the entire Vietnam War. Did you know that? You probably didn't, because our media never mention it. But here's video from Mexico shot in just the past few days. So that's Mexico. Keep in mind, we share a nearly 2,000-mile-long border with the country you just saw. So you don't have to be Robert Gates or Barry McCaffrey or some other august foreign policy mandarin to wonder, if that's happening there right now, why won't it spill over into the United States? And of course, needless to say, it will spill over into the United States. And why wouldn't it? There's no border left. Shouldn't Americans know that? Yes, they should. But most have no idea because the media won't tell them. Joe Biden, the President of the United States, went to the border yesterday, and there was no mention of the Civil War right across the river. That's not just weird, it's scary. And it's just the beginning of the deception from your media. Ending the use of fossil fuels is the #1 domestic priority of the Democratic Party and of the White House that leads that party. So how is this new green utopia going to work exactly? Well, we don't have to guess at that. It's already happening in Europe, and the result has been, let's see, mass poverty and social unrest. Within the last week, there have been enormous protests in Paris, the capital of Europe, against a government that cares more about global warming theology than about the lives of its children. Did you know that? Did you have any idea? You probably didn't. Here's what it looks like. So that seems like a big story, right? And yet, in our media landscape, that story effectively doesn't exist. So if you want details about what is currently happening in Paris, you're going to have to track down an English-language Turkish news site called Anadolu. And in that site, you will read a story in which a Turkish reporter interviews one of the protesters, who puts it this way, and we're quoting, "We went out today for the sake of all the French who are dying of hunger because of the high prices they can no longer afford." Well, that's kind of a big story. People going hungry in Paris? Well, yeah. Energy prices in France are at an all-time high thanks to climate policy, and that means people can't buy food. Shouldn't you know that? Might that be relevant to you? But you don't know it because the Biden administration and the media don't want you to know. The Biden administration is busy spending your tax dollars trying to replicate the disaster you just saw in France here and around the world. And most people have no idea it's even happening. And that's by design, because our media are controlled. And if you still don't believe that, if you don't believe that what you see and read from our news outlets is fake, consider what is happening tonight in Brazil. So thanks to what was very clearly a rigged election, a convicted criminal called Lula da Silva is now the president of the most important country in South America. Millions of people in Brazil understand exactly what happened. They know that their democracy has been hijacked, possibly forever. But there's not much they can do about that. Lula may be a criminal, in fact he is, but he has the full support of both the Biden administration and the Chinese government. So yesterday, in frustration, a group of Brazilian protesters swarmed their legislature. Watch. Now, you may actually have seen some of that video in the United States over the last couple of days, and you saw it because it has political uses. What's happened in Brazil is being likened to January 6th, and of course populist leaders in this country are being blamed for it. Oh, it was Trump and Steve Bannon who did it. That's not true, but even if it were true, it would be just the tail end of the story. It would be the result of something that happened before. So the obvious question is, why are protesters in Brazil so angry? Well, they're angry because the new Lula government has eliminated their most basic civil liberties. Lula is working to turn Brazil into a Chinese-style dictatorship, and he's doing it very quickly, with maximum aggression. Now, our media don't want to talk about that. They refuse to. Why? Well, for reasons that should make you very nervous. Matt Turman has been covering this story anyway, virtually alone among American reporters. He's done some extraordinary reporting, and he has some extraordinary details for us tonight. He joins us now. Matt, thank you so much for coming on. So, simple question. Why are the protesters in Brazil so angry?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. They have this hard-fought constitutional republic and strong, robust democracy, or do they? Lula was, as you correctly stated, a convicted felon, 19 judges, 12 charges, 12-year sentence, and released by a Supreme Court Justice, Alexander de Moraes, and his team of fellow traveling Supreme Court justices to enter into this election. And then this election had no transparency. So the protesters who protested for the last 70 days peacefully, no arson, no violence, just wanted a evidence proof that this was an honest election. They did not get it. They have stayed by the military, begging the military to adjudicate the separated powers dispute. Now, it turns out, as the plot usually does thicken in these situations, that there were many an agent provocateur yesterday at these buildings and doing incredible gross damage, breaking windows and such. And it looks like this is turning into a Reichstag fire and being used to clamp down on these democratic protests. The protests are no more. The camps have been disbanded by executive and judicial mandate and fiat. And now they've set up a concentration camp where 1,200 Brazilian citizens are locked in the gymnasium and grounds of the Federal Police Training Center in Brasilia. And it has just been reported that 2 of them have died. There is no water, no food, no bathrooms. Brazilian countrymen of this government are being treated in worse circumstances than the Geneva Convention allows for foreign combatants. It is absolutely gross, and even more gross, as we just found out, according to a high-ranking influential senator, Marcos Doval, released documents that prove the Justice Minister, Flavio Dino, knew about it the day before, that there would be violence potentially, and even the setup for violence, and Lula knew as well. They did not cordon off the buildings. It looks like there are even more similarities with our own.
I'm recognizing the template here, but just to zero it out, so the country's becoming a dictatorship, and the State Department and all the celebrities, Mark Ruffalo and the rest, who supported this criminal Lula, are saying nothing, and they're continuing to support it as he eliminates civil liberties?
That is absolutely correct. There is nothing but frame it as Bannon, Trump, Bolsonaro plotted a coup from Florida, which there is no facts that back that up even remotely.
Yeah. Matthew Turman, I appreciate your report tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So as we said, the sporadic fighting in Mexico, which has been ongoing since at least 2006, really at this point can only be described as a civil war. And it's intensifying. It has massive implications for the United States. Fox's Bill Melugin has been on top of it for quite some time now. He joins us tonight. Bill, what's happening, would you say, in Mexico at the moment?
Tucker, good evening to you. It's calmed down a little bit now, but what happened south of our border just a few days ago really looked more reminiscent of scenes from the Iraq War, because we're talking the Mexican military and the Sinaloa cartel engaged in all-out combat, all-out war. Take a look at this video showing a Mexican military helicopter firing down on Sinaloa cartel positions in the Mexican city of Culiacan. You can hear that machine gun firing. You can see those tracers in the night as the Mexican government was running an operation that ended with the successful capture of Ovidio Guzman. That's the son of notorious Sinaloa cartel kingpin El Chapo. Now, the Mexican government says they had to call in these Black Hawk helicopters to attack a convoy of 25 cartel vehicles, including truck-mounted cartel gun platforms. Now, as you can imagine, that operation stirred up an absolute hornet's nest with the cartel. This video here shows Sinaloa cartel gunmen and sicarios setting up a roadblock on a local road in response. They're armed with machine guns and heavy weaponry, and they are preparing to fight. It's also a reminder of the heavy weaponry the cartels have access to, equal to the Mexican military. Another video shows the Mexican military being ambushed by cartel gunmen in Tamaulipas, as some innocent civilians are caught in the crossfire. Now, during all that widespread violence, the Mexican government reports 30 people were left dead, including 10 Mexican soldiers and 19 suspected Sinaloa cartel members. And the violence certainly wasn't just isolated to city streets. Take a look at this video. You can't hear what's going on, but what it shows is passengers on a civilian aircraft taking cover as their aircraft is shot by cartel members as their plane is sitting on the runway. That flight was preparing to leave Culiacan for Mexico City. Thankfully, none of the civilians on that airplane ended up getting hurt. And Tucker, the Sinaloa cartel, as we all know, is one of the main Mexican cartels responsible for the major amounts of fentanyl just pouring in through our southern border. Mexico says they had to use almost 3,600 soldiers in their operation to capture El Chapo's son. Now there are some GOP lawmakers here in the U.S. who say it's time to give Mexico U.S. military assistance to help them in this war, similar to what we're already doing with Ukraine. We'll send it back to you.
Bill Melugin for us tonight. Thank you so much for that.
Thanks.
So if you remember back to August and the atrocities the media told us about, not in Mexico or Brazil, certainly not in Ukraine, but at Mar-a-Lago, remember that? Classified documents were discovered, illicit classified documents, including top-secret cocktail napkins at Mar-a-Lago. There was even, and we're quoting the federal indictment, a birthday dinner menu found somewhere near the First Lady's closet. Now, the Washington Post first reported that the nuclear codes or relevant nuclear materials, secret ones, were discovered there, and that's why a former CIA director and Michael Beschloss, the historian, suggested it could be time for Donald Trump to be executed by electric chair. And for sure, and this was the consensus in Washington, once these documents were discovered, this crime was unearthed. There was no possibility Donald Trump could ever again run for office. He needed to go to jail. Every person connected to the Biden administration told us that, including Joe Biden himself. What data was there in there that may compromise sources and methods, Biden asked. So as Biden was saying that, it turns out that he was, and you'll be shocked to hear this, doing exactly the same thing that he accused Donald Trump of doing. Joe Biden was storing classified documents in a private office at a fake think tank that has been set up for him at the University of Pennsylvania. That fake think tank is called the Penn Biden Center for Diplomacy and Global Engagement at the University of Pennsylvania. Now, we should tell you we don't know exactly what these classified documents are, and unlike Michael Beschloss and the former head of the CIA, we're not going to speculate. But according to CNN, they were very sensitive. Quote, the classified materials included some top-secret files with the sensitive compartmented information designation, also known as SCI, which is used for highly sensitive information obtained from intelligence sources. So what exactly were these materials? Were they the nuclear codes? We're probably going to find out pretty soon, because there's no question Merrick Garland will unleash one of his signature pre-dawn raids on the University of Pennsylvania at any moment. Because it's a national security threat. Merrick Garland will get right on that. But actually, Penn may be a national security event. We know you're very impressed your nephew got in, but Penn, as an institution, takes an awful lot of money from the Chinese Communist Party. I'm not making that up. In recent years, Penn has received more than $50 million from anonymous Chinese donors. So the question is, were those donors peering at the classified documents, the national security secrets that Joe Biden had been stashing at the fake think tank that Penn set up for him? How much access did they have exactly to these documents? We're very much looking forward to the Washington Post expose on that. So it's now clear there are huge and potentially disastrous problems with the COVID shots. We tried to point that out on this show at the beginning using Biden administration numbers. We were called names, and then it turns out, we didn't know this at the time, we were censored by the White House. That came out the other day. Interesting story. We'll tell it to you next. It was never really a secret that there were huge problems with the COVID shots. And we knew this because the Biden administration's own VAERS database indicated that from the beginning. A lot of people were being injured. But the media suppressed that news. We tried to point it out more than a year ago, not because we have a problem with vaccines or anti-vaxxers, but because if you're going to force people to take something, you probably ought to know what it is and what effects it might have. That's the most basic right of all, to know that what goes into your body, to know something about it. But in trying to say that, we were censored, and now we know we were censored directly by the White House. In April of 2021, the White House's Director of Digital Strategy, a character called Rob Flaherty, sent this email to Facebook, quote, "The top post on Facebook about vaccines today is Tucker Carlson saying they don't work," he complained. He then the White House pressured Facebook to follow its policy of, quote, reduction, meaning censorship. We're quoting, "If reduction means pumping our most vaccine-hesitant audience with Tucker Carlson saying it doesn't work, then I'm not sure it's reduction." In other words, censor more. The Facebook employee responded by promising that the company was, quote, running this down now. We asked Rob Flaherty to join us tonight to explain, but of course he's a coward and he won't. So we only know this, by the way, because of a lawsuit from the Attorneys General of Louisiana and Missouri. Jeff Landry is the AG in Louisiana, and we are honored to have him join us tonight. Mr. Landry, thank you so much for coming on. So you're the chief law enforcement officer of your state. You're the Attorney General. This would be illegal, would it not be?
Well, it's certainly a violation of your First Amendment right, Tucker. Yeah. And I wouldn't say that the White House pressured Facebook. I would say that the White House demanded that they do something about the video that you had posted. Look, this suit is about whether or not the government has basically suppressed American speech as those Americans go about debating the very policies that the government has us under.
Right.
And if the White House did not like your position, or if your position did not agree with the White House, then you were silenced. And the evidence in this case right now is showing us that that's exactly what happened.
Government is not allowed to censor speech, period. As you said, that is the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights. It's the core of the Constitution right there. And this is an instance of government censoring speech. Is it more complicated than that, or am I missing something?
No, it's extremely simple. When Eric Schmidt and I first put the theory out, and when we filed this case back in June, we were basically laughed out of the courthouse by many in the media. And then, thankfully, this federal judge allowed us to conduct discovery. From that discovery, we've deposed a number of government actors like Dr. Fauci. And think about the things that we are discovering today. Had not this federal judge allowed this discovery, again, the American people would still be in the dark. Information about the government censoring their speech, their ability to debate the policies that affect them, just like the video that you put out. We wouldn't know. But it is a clear violation of their First Amendment right. It's clearly a First Amendment violation.
And just a yes or no question, because I can't resist. I was told once by a source that during that deposition, Tony Fauci demanded that the court reporter wear a mask. Is that true?
Yes, I was there. She sneezed, and he just about came out of his chair. And I would remind you that 24 hours before that, he was on the podium at the White House telling everyone that in order to really be protected, you needed to be boosted again. And so evidently he didn't have as much confidence in that booster as maybe he portrayed then, because she sneezed, he jumped and demanded that she wear a mask. And of course, he ensured that you and I were censored every time we disagreed with him.
Neurotic old man. Jeff Landry, Attorney General of the state of Louisiana. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.
So we're going to learn a lot more about government censorship of reporting about COVID, the vaccines, masks, the whole thing, the lockdowns. Elon Musk is going to release Twitter files on those questions, and he has apparently deputized the first person you would deputize to do it, to go through these files, and that's Alex Berenson, whose Substack has been really the source of most reasonable reporting on COVID. He's also the author of Pandemia. Alex Berenson joins us tonight. Alex, thanks so much for coming on. How heartening that, of all people, Elon Musk would ask you to go through these files. It's almost unbelievable. We're grateful for it. Can you give us a preview of what we're going to see in these files?
Well, the short answer, Tucker, is that I can't give you much of a preview beyond what I wrote today in the stack about Scott Gottlieb and Pfizer, and finding out that Gottlieb, who was the former FDA commissioner and is a board member of Pfizer, which obviously has an enormous financial interest in the vaccines, was also pushing Twitter to suppress people he didn't like. Not just me, but in one case, a fellow Trump administration appointee who followed him as the acting FDA commissioner. Later in 2019. That's how much Scott Gottlieb and Pfizer didn't want discussion of the vaccines. I want to say one other thing about that, and then answer your question about the Twitter files. What's also so striking about that is that when Gottlieb had a problem, he went to a guy named Todd O'Boyle. Todd O'Boyle was a lobbyist, a senior lobbyist in Twitter's Washington office, and he is the guy the White House turned to first when they wanted to censor at Twitter. So we have evidence of, let's say, overlap between Pfizer and the White House as they tried to push vaccines, as they tried to discourage vaccine hesitancy, and as they tried to suppress debate around the vaccines. And I think that's very striking. And when I sue Pfizer and Scott Gottlieb and Andy Slavitt and the Biden White House, that will be, I think, a unique opportunity, assuming I can survive the motion to dismiss, to actually see how how the company and the White House were talking in the summer of 2021 as the vaccines were clearly beginning to fail for those of us who were paying attention. As for the Twitter files, what we know now basically about COVID is what I reported and what a couple people reported last month. The files, it's a mistake to think of them as some huge data dump that we can all go through. It's an iterative process where we're questioning Twitter about what's in there, and they're coming back to us with answers. So we'll know more in a couple weeks about Fauci, about Rochelle Walensky, and about everything else.
When you sue Pfizer and Gottlieb, we're going to celebrate in my house. And I think in many homes across this country. So thank you, Alex Berenson. Good to see you.
Thanks.
So people who follow politics closely were a little bit confused last week when the person who may be the most conservative member of the House of Representatives, Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, came out strongly for Kevin McCarthy for Speaker. He's not considered one of the most conservative members of Congress. But her point was, wait till you see what happens when he becomes Speaker. Well, she joins us after the break to explain what is going to happen. We'll be right back. Administration wants to protect you. They want to protect you. The same people who mandated an untested COVID shot and then attacked anyone who was injured by it want to protect you. Actually, the Biden administration is in fact taking a major step to ban fossil fuels and control your personal life. Pretty amazing story. Fox's Trace Gallagher has it for us tonight. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker, for the record, natural gas stoves are used in 40% of American households, but now the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission is considering banning gas stoves over concerns about harmful pollutants. A study in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health says more than 12% of childhood asthma cases are caused by gas stoves. Now, we should note the study was co-authored by a liberal think tank that advocates for electrifying buildings, which is kind of like having Colonel Sanders conduct a study on the dangers of beef. A group that represents gas range manufacturers points out that regardless of what kind of stove you use, cooking itself produces harmful byproducts, and that ventilation is really the remedy. For now, the talk is focused on banning gas stoves, but it won't be long before they also come for gas fireplaces. And with wood fireplaces already banned in many areas of the country, the fireplace altogether could be a thing of the past. Unless, of course, you have an electric fireplace, otherwise known as a TV screen, with video flames.
The Yule log. We'll all be reduced to watching the Yule log. Trace Gallagher, thanks so much. You can watch, if you want more Trace, and you do, you can watch weeknights midnight on Fox News at night. So all last week was in the news world consumed by the drama over who's going to be Speaker of the House. Kevin McCarthy wanted it. About 20 people tried to stop him from getting it, and it seemed like a left-right argument. Kevin McCarthy's too liberal, they argued. The conservatives were against him. But it wasn't actually that simple, because on Kevin McCarthy's side was probably the most conservative member of the House of Representatives, Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, and she took a huge amount of criticism for standing with Kevin McCarthy. But she did it anyway, and we thought it'd be interesting to ask her, why did you do that? There has to be a good reason. She joins us tonight. Congresswoman, thank you so much for coming on. So you were criticized or people are confused. You're the most conservative, you're for McCarthy. Why? Why did you do that?
Thanks for asking me, Tucker. America's used to seeing me leading the fight, and that's what I've been doing for the past 2 years. Nothing has changed about that. I just want to lead the fight against the Democrats. And so the reason why I supported Kevin McCarthy is because of the agenda that he laid out and the agenda that our Republican conference agreed on. You see, I'm ready to investigate the Biden administration. I'm ready to hold the deep state and the intelligence community accountable for what they've done to Americans, censoring them, and the way they're going after the Trump family, President Trump, his administration, staff, and supporters. I'm sick and tired of watching the hypocrisy where people are being persecuted and rotting away in the D.C. jail, but yet Antifa and BLM members have been let off. And I don't want to see any more of our oil sold to China. That oil needs to stay here in the United States. And the amount of fentanyl poisoning that has happened to Americans is a reason for impeachment in my book, not just of Mayorkas, but of Joe Biden himself. These are the fights that I am ready to go on, and I didn't want to lie to the American people and let them think there was any chance that our conference could elect anyone else. There was no one else running, but there was an argument about the rules package, and I do think that was important for the American people because they saw the fight on the camera. But we're going to be waging those fights in our conference, and I'm ready to go.
Amen. That's a good reason. I just want to ask you really quickly about the news that just broke that Joe Biden, who's trying to put Donald Trump in jail for having classified documents at his home, also had classified documents at his office at the University of Pennsylvania. What do you make of this?
Well, this is a huge story. It's very serious. As a matter of fact, Joe Biden conceivably stole those documents. What people need to understand is the President of the United States is the only one that can declassify documents, not the Vice President. For Joe Biden to steal documents and have possession of them, this is a serious investigation, and the communists at NARA can't hide it anymore. And Merrick Garland and the Department of Justice, they have to be held accountable if they don't treat Joe Biden exactly the same way they're treating President Trump. It's ridiculous and it's shameful.
Merrick Garland is shameful. The fact he's the Attorney General is shameful, I would say.
He should be impeached. Yes.
At least. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you, and go Dogs.
So Joe Biden finally, after 2 years of keeping the border open, decided to visit the border. He showed up in El Paso. He made no mention about the civil war underway there, the brutal cartel violence going on that is certainly coming here any day. The whole visit was effectively a photo op. We'll speak to someone who was there next. So Joe Biden finally made it down to the U.S.-Mexico border that he's left open for the last 2 years. Yesterday, he went to El Paso.
I know you have people every day, but I'm trying to get a sense of the flow. The average. Well, average, I would say 300 to 400.
Correct, yes.
300 to 400.
And then we have our little peaks, but we have that over 1,000 per day, 900 per day.
So Joe Biden didn't see any foreign nationals living on the streets of El Paso because, like Baby Doc or any other dictator, he just had them removed before he got there. We're not making that up. We can prove it. You're seeing the pictures before and after Joe Biden's visit on your screen right now. Now, White House spokesman John Kirby, one of the most dishonest people in American life, was asked about this today. Here's his non-answer.
There's reporting that El Paso has cleared the downtown of these expansive migrant camps that have grown there in advance of the president's arrival. Is the president going to see a sanitized version of El Paso when he arrives at the border on Sunday?
The president is very much looking forward to seeing for himself firsthand what the border security situation looks like, particularly in El Paso.
can Kirby live with himself? What a liar. Stand up for the country for once. Irene Armendariz-Jackson is a native of El Paso and is the president of the Border Security Coalition. She's married to a Border Patrol agent. She joins us tonight to assess. Thank you so much for coming on tonight. So you are from El Paso, which is one of the great cities in this country, in my view. It's really been hurt by an open border. How did you respond when you saw the White House team clean it up just for Biden's arrival?
Well, it just exposes one more time the hypocrisy and the lies of this administration. Nothing that comes out of that administration should we believe. You know, when they say it's day, I go out and look at a window and make sure that it is day, because I absolutely do not believe anything they say. So when he said that he was coming to see for himself, we already knew what they were going to do, because they did it when Mayorkas came. They did it when Harris came. Why wouldn't they do it when Biden was coming?
But you have to live there. It's your city. I mean, they leave, but you're still there.
Absolutely.
How does that feel?
Absolutely. Well, it's a slap on the face. You know, we are in the midst of a crisis. We see it every day. So I'm standing in one of the epicenters where there was people sleeping everywhere. Around the corner is the Chihuahuita Street, which is where all the photos that you see. But here you see some drone footage as well. And they were sleeping almost right on top of each other. There's another location as well. So as soon as we heard that he was coming, I hurried down here and I made sure that I took those last pictures and so we could prove to America that Biden was not coming to see the reality of the border. He was coming to see a sanitized, a clean El Paso. And not only shame on the administration, but shame on our Representative Veronica Escobar, and shame on our mayor for allowing this to happen. What was the price that they promised them to be able to clean this up and make Biden look good?
Selling out their own city. I'm so glad that you said that. That's the most shameful. That's exactly right. Irene Armendariz-Jackson, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Go to bordersecuritycoalition.com and support us.
Amen. So no one says it, but America was actually doing pretty well before the diversity and equity and inclusion initiatives were imposed on everybody by force. American society is actually much less equal in the wake of them, and far more racist. We're going to speak to someone who's been on the Civil Rights Commission for decades and who has seen that change with sadness. Next. The Pentagon has decided to spend more than $60 million erasing American history by renaming Army bases. This is part of the equity effort, but as part of a much broader attempt by the Biden administration to divide Americans by their identities and to erase this country's history, because you can't control a country if it still has a history. Peter Kirsten has watched all of this for decades. He has been on the U.S. Civil Rights Commission for more than 20 years. And we asked him what he thinks of the Biden administration's equity agenda. Not equality, equity. How's it different? Spoke to him for Tucker Carlson today. Here's part of the conversation.
The travesties of what's transpired over the last maybe 50 years, but it's been speeding up over the last 5 to 10 years, where we no longer identify as Americans, but, you know, as Barack Obama famously put it, citizen of the world. No, we're Americans, and there's no place like America. It affords the greatest opportunity. It's been a mecca for everybody, whether they're oppressed or not, to come to, and I think we're squandering that inheritance. We are a country. We are not separate entities. We are not separate biological or racial, sexual groups. We are all Americans, and unfortunately,
out of many, one.
Out of, well, you know, Al Gore might not have been
out of one, many.
Right, but that he was prescient.
He gave it away. He did.
Sure did. He sure did. And you know, I don't mean to necessarily paint a gloomy picture of this or get conspiratorial on it, but you can actually look at what the left has been proposing for 50 or 60 years, and some of it is coming into fruition. And that is that the idea of America was something that they objected to. They had a different idea of America, and identity politics is one of the best ways of promoting their view of America. That is through identity politics. Now, there's a retail aspect, there's a retail political aspect to identity politics. Democrats like to divide people on the basis of race, sex, and other immutable classifications so they can pander to those folks and get them to vote for them because their ideas are not something that you would ordinarily accept. Their political ideas, their policy prescriptions are not something that most people would adopt. Open borders is one good example. But if you can separate people on the basis of identity, appeal to them on that basis, which is a powerful appeal throughout history. We've shown that that's a powerful appeal, but also a dangerous one. But if they do it that way, they can coalesce certain groups to vote for them. I think the Civil Rights Commission at this point is coming up with a lot of policy prescriptions that promote identity politics. And it's, all I can say, Tucker, is it's poisonous. You can see it readily that it's harming the United States of America. Again, it escapes out into the polity, and we see it in our schools. We see it in corporations now. Americans are at each other's throats. They're afraid to say certain things that you'd ordinarily say as few as 5 or 10 years ago. You'd say certain things with impunity and wouldn't think anything of it. And when you censor people because you're afraid of being canceled because you've transgressed some aspect of identity politics, ideas can't be debated.
Tonight, Kevin McCarthy's continued attempt to become Speaker of the House continues at this hour. The House is expected to take another vote late tonight. You'll see it live here on Fox, of course. But first, an anniversary. 2 years ago today, a Capitol Hill police officer called Michael Byrd shot an unarmed woman in the neck. At the time of that killing, Byrd had a documented history of gross negligence with a firearm. He'd left a loaded Glock pistol in a public men's room at the Capitol, which for a law enforcement official is a firing offense. But for some reason, Michael Byrd was still in the force that day. The woman he killed was called Ashley Babbitt. Babbitt was a married 14-year veteran of the U.S. military. She ran a pool cleaning company with her husband in San Diego. Physically, she was tiny. She was also unarmed. Michael Byrd later admitted he had no indication at all that Babbitt was carrying a weapon. She posed no visible threat. He killed her anyway. Under normal circumstances, Byrd would have been fired immediately and charged with murder, which he clearly committed. But that's not what happened. After doing essentially no investigation into the shooting, Nancy Pelosi's congressional police force declared Byrd a national hero, and the media strongly agreed. Byrd went on television to accept accolades and to complain about racism. He was never punished for killing Ashley Babbitt. He was rewarded for it. Ashley Babbitt's mother, meanwhile, got a very different sort of treatment. Babbitt's mother was arrested today in Washington by the Capitol Police. Her crime? Trying to hold a memorial service for her daughter. 2 years later, it's clear that Ashley Babbitt her death is by far the most significant thing that happened at the U.S. Capitol building that day. But at the same time, it is the least talked about event of January 6th. Why is that? Well, because the facts about what actually happened on January 6th disrupt the lies, what they've told you happened on January 6th. And those lies have proven very useful to the Biden administration and to permanent Washington. On the basis of a wholly created myth about what happened that day, the Biden Pentagon conducted an unprecedented political purge of the entire U.S. military. The FBI and various intel agencies increased their control over the American media. And most obviously, the DOJ has been allowed to prosecute and jail hundreds of nonviolent political protesters whose crime was having the wrong opinions. Lies about January 6th, which have been relentless, have enabled some of the most unscrupulous people in our country to make a mockery of our Bill of Rights and to steal our core freedoms. So they can't talk about Ashley Babbitt. Talking about Ashley Babbitt makes it very clear who the real culprits are and who the real threats to this country continue to be. And they're not the January 6th protesters. So instead, they lie about what happened that day, and they do it in the boldest possible ways, without shame and with maximum aggression. Here's Hakeem Jeffries, leader of the Democrats in the House, telling you that 5 police officers were killed on January 6th, when in fact the real total is 0.
We are gathered here to honor their memory and acknowledge with deep gratitude the tremendous bravery of the hundreds of officers who defended us at this citadel of democracy that fateful day. As a result of the events on January 6th, the lives of 5 heroic officers were lost.
5 heroic officers were lost, he said. It's almost impossible to believe that adults could stand behind him as he said that, because everyone in the picture you just saw knows that is not true. It's not a stilted interpretation of events, it's a flat-out lie. No police officers were killed on January 6th, period. Ashley Babbitt was killed on January 6th. But chances are your grandchildren will not know that, because history will likely record the lie you just heard as true, simply because it's been repeated so often. Everyone in authority has said the same thing in unison for 2 solid years. As our thoroughly dishonest Attorney General recently put it, quote, "We will never forget the 5 officers who responded selflessly on January 6th and who have since lost their lives." His boss, Joe Biden, repeated that lie today from the White House.
These people and the people representing those who couldn't be here because they gave their lives for this is incredibly consequential. And that's not political talk, that's historical fact.
That's historical fact, says Joe Biden, as he manufactures history, as he tells lies. They've been doing this, telling these same lies since the very first day, January 6th, 2021, almost like it was a coordinated operation. Remember when they told you that Officer Brian Sicknick, was beaten to death with a fire extinguisher?
Officer Sicknick died after being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher.
Sicknick died after being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher.
Officer Brian Sicknick died after being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher during the hours-long attack.
They beat a Capitol police officer to death with a fire extinguisher.
Officer Brian Sicknick died after being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher during the fight.
He died at the age of 42 after he was bludgeoned with a fire extinguisher.
That's not true. And in the end, thanks to the medical examiner in the District of Columbia, we learned the fact, which is that Brian Sicknick died of a stroke well after the January 6th protests. He was not beaten to death with a fire extinguisher. But that did not stop their lying or even slow them down. Joe Biden just awarded one of this country's highest civilian honors, the Presidential Citizens Medal, to officers working on January 6th. And that would include the officers who opened the doors of the Capitol building to the so-called insurrectionists. The officers who let them inside and then were rewarded for it by the President of the United States. What's going on here, you may wonder? Well, don't ask. You're not allowed to know what's going on here. Nor can you know about the very obvious clandestine role of federal agencies that encouraged the events of January 6th. That happened, but its details have never been explained. A lot has still not been explained from that day, despite a committee that was impaneled for more than a year. For example, you remember the pipe bomber who planted explosives outside the Democratic National Committee? Well, those explosives, it turns out, were under a bench at the same moment that Kamala Harris, who had Secret Service protection with her, who swept the building, was there. So how did the U.S. Secret Service miss a bomb sitting in plain sight during its security sweep? Well, we can't answer that because the FBI still, to this day, refuses to release all the security footage. Why? What's going on here? Almost unique among media outlets, Revolver News asked that question.
The pipe bomber even looks at camera to head on, for some reason. It's very frustrating, because we can't see the moment the pipe bomber plants the pipe bomb, but the FBI can. That's because the whole scene should be captured on camera 1 as well, and much more clearly than camera 2. Camera 1 has a clear shot of both benches. If the FBI released the full tape from camera 1, we could see the pipe bomber planting the bomb.
So somebody planted bombs outside the headquarters of this country's 2 main political parties. That would seem to be a big story, and yet no one ever mentions it again, including the FBI. In fact, the Bureau won't disclose any information about the suspect, not his height, weight, shoe size, anything. So if they wanted to catch this person, wouldn't they be telling you all they can about who it is? But they're not. Why aren't they? And what was Kamala Harris doing there? Why did she lie about being there? We can't answer those questions. We should be able to. Nor does anyone in authority want to talk about Ray Epps. Ray Epps, of course, is the man who was caught on tape encouraging the crowd outside the Capitol, both on January 5th and 6th, to commit felonies by rushing inside. Now, what's interesting is that the January 6th committee, under public pressure, did in the end interview Ray Epps. Now, we don't have all of the committee's records about that interview. We should, but we don't. But some have been released, and what they tell is a remarkable story. In the testimony that we have, the committee coaches Ray Epps on how to answer questions about his involvement. Quote, "I was in the front with a few others. I also orchestrated it. I helped get people there." End quote. Now, Epps admitted that in a text message to a relative on January 6th. He's admitting crimes. He's never been even charged for those crimes. But what's so fascinating is that when those facts came up in his interview with the committee, someone on the committee responds this way, and we're quoting, "I just want to understand a little more your use of the word orchestrated. It sounds to me like at this point, when you sent this text, you had turned away in part because of seeing some things that you didn't agree with. Is that right? Like when you sent this, you were already on your way from the Capitol because of concerns of people taking it in a different direction." Is that the most leading question ever asked in the history of a congressional hearing? Probably. And the whole interview goes on like this. Keep in mind, Ray Epps is one of the only people caught on camera that day encouraging others to break the law. He's one of the only ones. And yet he's never been charged. And the January 6th committee was on his side. Why was the committee and its members working so hard to help Ray Epps? Now, in his interview with the committee, Ray Epps said he didn't work for law enforcement, in a very specifically worded answer, clearly thought through ahead of time. The question is, did Ray Epps work or have any contact with any government agency? Did he talk about January 6th before it happened with any employee of the U.S. government? We don't know. We do know that 2 years after January 6th, long after an awful lot of other people have gone to jail for walking around the Capitol building, Ray Epps is still a free man. He's never been charged, much less imprisoned in solitary confinement like so many others. Why is that? Well, let's just stop lying. At this point, it's pretty obvious why that is. But of course, they're still lying about it. Julie Kelly is one of the very few reporters in America who has covered this story honestly since the first day. She's the author of the book January 6th, and we are honored to have her join us tonight. Julie Kelly, thank you so much for coming on. Can you just give us a couple, since you are the human encyclopedia on January 6th, I would say, a repository of all the information. I mean, just give us a very quick overview of the scale of the law enforcement response to what happened 2 years ago today.
So, Tucker, what we have now are almost 1,000 criminal defendants related to their involvement in January 6th. What the FBI and Department of Justice now is warning is that figure will double by the time that they're done. They believe that they have 2,000 perpetrators of the alleged insurrection, and they are going to continue this manhunt for Trump supporters into this year. And so you had the FBI official this week, the new head of the Washington, D.C. field office, say this investigation will go on for years. So what is this about? This is not about making sure that people who really committed violence, a small handful that day, are brought to justice. This is to perpetuate Joe Biden and the Department of Justice and FBI's phony narrative that domestic terrorists, i.e. Trump supporters, pose a grave threat to this country. It's really shameful. It has resulted in the destruction of so many innocent lives and their families. The FBI continues to arrest people almost every week. And I believe right now we have at least 100 people incarcerated behind bars, either under pretrial detention or serving out excessive prison sentences for either plea deals or being convicted by a jury in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, while rapists go free and 7 million foreign nationals flood into our country. I have to say, since you're in contact with an awful lot of people who've been swept up in this and who are also researching it, at this point, does any honest person believe that the feds were all over this? I mean, parts of this were clearly influenced by federal agencies. I mean, that's not a conspiracy theory, is it?
Well, it's not, and that's why I think it's interesting, Tucker, that in an 845-page investigative report by the January 6th committee, Christopher Wray's name is not mentioned a single time. They didn't even interview FBI Director Christopher Wray. Now, why is that? They also didn't interview Stephen D'Antuono, the newly retired head of the Washington field office, who was in charge of FBI agents, informants, et cetera, assets on January 6, 2021.
I mean, we made a documentary on this a year ago, as you know, and you helped us with it. And we were attacked widely by a lot of Republicans, too, for mentioning the obvious, which is the feds had a hand in this. Will we ever know the truth, do you think?
We have to. We now know for a fact, Tucker, because of these trials, that there were informants months before January 6th run into the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, at least 8 informants in the Proud Boys months before January 6th. What were they doing? We have to find out.
I think we do. Julie Kelly, thank you for your relentless, dogged reporting on this. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tucker.
So the one person we know for a fact was murdered, killed without justification on January 6th, 2021, was Ashley Babbitt, an unarmed 14-year military veteran. And she's the one person whose name was not mentioned during any of the official January 6th memorials. Instead, Ashley Babbitt's mother, Mickey Withoft, was arrested today by the Capitol Police. She was apparently at the Capitol to memorialize her daughter's death. Police say she was jaywalking, so they put her in handcuffs. Hard to believe, but here's the footage. So her daughter was shot to death, unarmed, with no stated justification by an officer who shouldn't have been on the force, with a documented history of the reckless use of firearms, and it's the mother who gets arrested for jaywalking at a memorial for her own daughter. You wonder how much more this the country can take. Aaron Babbitt has suffered for 2 years because of it. Of course, he is the husband of Ashley Babbitt, and we are happy to have him join us tonight. Aaron, thank you so much for coming on. I have to ask you about the arrest of your mother-in-law by the same police force that killed your wife.
Yeah, I just saw that video for the first time when I was coming into the studio. My phone was blowing up. A little backstory on that. Mickey's actually been in D.C. since the beginning of August. She's been there every day, living in that area, sitting outside the jail at night and protesting outside the Capitol. So I'm not going to say it's a coincidence. She was finally arrested on January 6th, but that doesn't really smell right.
Well, it's beyond. On the 2-year anniversary of her daughter's killing, it's beyond. And I've asked you this before, but I have to ask you again. Has anyone in elected office reached out to take your side, to take up your case to get justice for your wife who was killed without justification that day?
It's still the same. You know, Troy Nels, Louis Gohmert, but he's out now. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz. I'm sure there's a couple of Paul Gosar. You know, there's a couple other ones, but it's still that very small. It's a very small percentage.
Looking back 2 years to the day after her killing, you know, what do you make of it? How would you sum up this experience?
I mean, for me personally, I mean, I've learned over these last 2 years, it's never going to get easier losing her. It just gets a little bit different every day.
Yeah.
And I'm just in full force mode of continuing my fight for Ashley, and that's what I will continue to do.
Well, I hope you prevail. You can't just shoot people and then move on. And I hope you won't let them. Aaron Babbitt, thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.
So earlier this week, as Kevin McCarthy struggled to win over recalcitrant Republicans and support him to become the next Speaker of the House, we offered up a suggestion for what McCarthy could do, an important, we thought, important reform. And it looks like McCarthy, who is apparently on his way to becoming Speaker, has taken up that idea. We will speak to a member of Congress who will be quarterbacking that for him. Plus, there is a war going on in our neighbor to the south in Mexico, a hot war. People are trying to shoot down airplanes. This has not gotten a lot of coverage. It needs a lot of coverage, and it suggests, well, it suggests big changes for us. When you have a war on your border, things are different. We'll get the very latest on
This is a Fox News Alert. I'm Trace Gallagher, live in Los Angeles. The battle for House Speaker could come to an end later tonight. The House is set to reconvene less than 2 hours from now. Earlier today, 15 of the 20 conservative holdouts threw their support behind GOP leader Kevin McCarthy during the 12th and 13 rounds of balloting. McCarthy needs 218 votes to become Speaker if all congressmen are present. They're still short of that majority, but optimism is building among Republicans. Watch.
Negotiations are going well. They're very confident that we're going to get 2 of the 6 to, at the very least, switch to present. But regardless, we should be in the area tonight to where we finally have a Speaker of the House and we can finally get to work on that.
Republicans have a slim majority of 222 lawmakers, so McCarthy can leave only 4 GOP minds unchanged. This is the longest stretch of Speaker votes since 1859, when 44 votes were held. Members of the 218 Congress have also not been sworn in yet, since that can't happen until a Speaker is elected. Keep us in mind. We will break in when news breaks out. Stay with Fox News Channel as we continue to follow tonight's events on Capitol Hill. The House is set to reconvene at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. here in California. I'll see you back here on Fox News at night. Now back to Tucker Carlson.
So we spent all week telling you about the fight on Capitol Hill over who's going to be the next Speaker of the House. Of course, at the beginning, the presumption was Kevin McCarthy was going to get the job, and then a group of his colleagues stood up and said, not so fast, and for a couple of days, they successfully held him off. Well, during that period, Kevin McCarthy decided to make some changes in the way he's going to administer the House and its priorities. And one of them is something that we've been talking about and certainly thinking about for quite some time, which is the creation of a committee modeled after the famous Frank Church Committee of the 1970s that will look a lot more closely at the influence of the FBI and the various intel agencies on domestic politics. They're not allowed to interfere in domestic politics. They clearly have been, and maybe Congress could get to the bottom of that. In fact, they're the only ones who can. Well, Kevin McCarthy's going to do that. Looks like he's going to be Speaker. And his plan, we have just learned, is to appoint really one of the most honest and dogged members of Congress, we'll just say it, Thomas Massie of Kentucky, to head that committee, the new Church Committee run by Congressman Thomas Massie, who, by the way, joins us now to announce it. Congressman, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Tucker. It looks like I'll probably be on that committee, but I can't say that I will run it. I will say that, while we've seen this drama unplay on the House floor behind the scenes, along with those people who withheld their vote for Kevin McCarthy until they got the transformational changes in the House and the way the House works, we were working with to make sure that this Church Committee, a suggestion that you've had, and thank you for suggesting that I should be on it. I don't know if you're clairvoyant or just made the future happen, but it's happening. We were making sure that this committee wasn't going to be fenced in, that it wasn't just going to be a show committee. We wanted to make sure that we have full jurisdiction, that if we stumble onto something at another 3-letter agency, that they don't say, whoa, that's out of your jurisdiction. Or if we find out there's more than a violation of the First Amendment right, if there are other civil rights that are being violated, we've secured a guarantee that we can go wherever the evidence leads us.
So everyone who's attempted this, and few have attempted it, but Frank Church certainly attempted it, and the Congress attempted it again in 1976 with their Special Committee on Assassinations. Those committees bumped right headlong into a wall of secrecy, and it drove a lot of them, those members, kind of crazy. Are you prepared for this honestly awesome task?
I think we are, and we've been laying the groundwork for that. Dan Bishop, my colleague from North Carolina, and Jim Jordan, we've been talking to the Intel Committee, which has the authority to get all of that information. By the way, a lot of this is going to play out down in the SCIF. You're going to have to trust the people that are put on this committee. And I'll tell you what, if there's something fishy going on, I'll come out of the SCIF and tell you. But a lot of it will be behind closed doors. There'll be classified information. But if we find anything illegal or unconstitutional, we will bring it forward.
Well, in your specific case, I believe you. And I'm so grateful that you're doing this. And I really hope that if you find anything like that, to the extent you can tell us about it, you will. Thomas Massie of Kentucky, thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.
So Congress is continuing to send billions a month to Ukraine because that war is more important than any other war. But actually, there is a new war that really will affect Americans, and it's in Mexico. The Mexican Defense Forces, the Mexican Army, now battling the Sinaloa cartel in response to the arrest of the son of El Chapo. And as of tonight, the Mexican Defense Forces appear to be losing. Watch. We should have identified it. The clip you saw of people cowering in the commercial airliner, that plane was being shot at by a 50 cal from the drug cartels. So it's a war. Now, Biden is visiting the border this weekend. He has no plan to deal with any of this, but it will affect us. How could it not? Retired U.S. Army Colonel Doug McGregor has been following this for months now. He joins us tonight. Doug, thanks so much for coming on. It would seem if a war breaks out in a country with whom you share this enormously long border that there would be coverage of it. There hasn't been. Why?
Well, we're lucky to get this glimpse. The media simply doesn't bother to cover it. But we really need to understand what this war is about. In 2020, we arrested the Mexican Minister of Defense, a general named Cienfuegos, in California, on charges associated with drug trafficking, human trafficking, and a whole list of crimes. Ultimately, we turned him over to the president of Mexico, President Obrador, who promptly released him, and we dropped the charges. Now, one of the reasons we dropped the charges is that we were promised more cooperation, but it hasn't been forthcoming. And so what we're really seeing here is not an effort to enforce the law, not an effort to do anything good. It's a fight between a cartel, the Sinaloa cartel, and the Mexican army. They're fighting for turf, they're fighting for cash, they're fighting for influence inside Mexico. They want the son of El Chapo's, presumably, so they can give it to the president of Mexico, and he can create the illusion that by turning him over to us, that there is cooperation with Mexico. Tucker, there's no cooperation with Mexico, and President Obrador is irrelevant. He does not run the country. He's a mouthpiece for the drug cartels.
So if the president of Mexico is a mouthpiece for the drug cartels, and the government of Mexico has allowed millions of foreign nationals to stream over its territory into our country, along with fentanyl that's killed hundreds of thousands of people in this country, why is Mexico not our main enemy?
Well, that's a good point, because Mexico right now, and Central America writ large, because of the criminality, is an existential threat to us. It's the only truly existential threat to the country. And remember, they reach into the United States. All of your major cities, there are networks there that reach back into Mexico. That's why they're powerful, and that's a war that'll eventually have to be fought, because at some point we will shut down the border, because things will have gotten that bad. When we do that, we will immediately be at war with the drug cartels, because we've cut off their income. And we're going to have to fight inside the United States as well as on our border. And that's going to demand the United States Army, because our Border Patrol is not nearly as well equipped. They're outgunned, outperformed in every sense, every category of military power by the cartels. What you saw is a good demonstration of just how powerful those cartels are.
So you're saying we could see scenes like this in our country?
Absolutely. It's inevitable.
So the last time a president suggested deploying the U.S. military to the border, the Pentagon scoffed at him, I think unconstitutionally, but they did. Do you think the Pentagon would be willing to fight the drug cartels? They seem to have they issue their own orders at this point, it seems.
Well, the fact that you're raising the question is a sad and tragic comment on the state of civil-military relations, that we have people at the top of the military establishment who pick and choose from a menu of tasks and decide what they will or won't do, presumably because there's lots of money in the Ukraine war, and there's not money for them in the Mexican war. And bear in mind that Ukraine and Mexico are just about equally corrupt. The difference is that right now they're killing more people in Ukraine, but the murder rate in Mexico is one of the highest in the world, about 136 out of every 100,000. So it leads most of the world in murder. So it's not that far off. It wouldn't take much to catch up with Ukraine. But as you point out, Ukraine means a lot of money for a lot of people in Washington. Shutting down the border, stopping the influx of illegals, stopping the human trafficking, and going after the drug cartels doesn't really make anybody money.
Just last question, not to be pedantic, but doesn't ignoring or disobeying an order from a president, doesn't that constitute a felony? Isn't that a crime? They're not allowed to do that, are they?
Yes, it is essentially on par with a criminal act. But you've got a chairman who decided to call the leadership of the Chinese military and tell them that, don't worry, if we attack you, we'll let you know in advance.
Why didn't he go to jail for that?
Why is he still holding his office? Why is he still a four-star general? I mean, he's not alone. When's the last time we held anybody in the military accountable for anything?
Sad. Doug McGregor, thank you.
Sure.
One of the first things Biden did after becoming president was cancel the Keystone XL pipeline. Now, in the middle of an energy crisis, the administration is admitting, to some extent, that was a disastrous decision. Details next. Change the population of a country virtually overnight through immigration, legal and illegal. Well, in some places, people who are born here no longer feel welcome here. It's probably inevitable, and it's happening a lot. Cheyenne Kenny of Turning Point just did some reporting on the effects of this. On December 30th, she went to her local DMV office in Oakland, California. That's an American city in an American state. And when she arrived, she found that the DMV was out of English language driver's manuals and had been for, quote, about a month. No, we don't have it in English here. It's just America. Don't worry. Cheyenne Kenny is the president of the Turning Point Oakland Activism Hub, and she joins us tonight. Cheyenne, thank you so much for coming on. So just to ask the obvious question, if you don't have an English language driver's manual, then people who speak English can't study for the driving test. Is that right?
Exactly, Tucker. I don't know how we're going to know how to drive if we can't even study the manual.
I was really struck by this video, and thank you so much for making it, because it's small things like this that really tell you what's happening to the country. But I was struck by the total lack of sympathy that you got from the woman at the DMV. I mean, she didn't seem that interested in the fact you couldn't read a driver's manual in your own country at all.
No, she did not care. And in fact, she told me to stop filming. She didn't seem like she didn't really want people to know there was no handbooks in English anymore. This is a public place. We should be allowed to film and talk about this, especially because we're all trying to learn to drive, and we can't because we can't read the manuals.
Well, of course, and it's your country, and this is the DMV. These people work for you.
Yeah.
And last question, I just want to make sure this is exactly correct, factually. They didn't have an English language driver's manual for over a month in the purportedly richest state in the country. They just couldn't get around to printing it or something?
A whole month, an entire month. Yeah.
Unbelievable. Cheyenne Kenny, I appreciate your coming on and telling that story and for documenting it for us.
Thank you, Tucker.
Thank you. So one of the first things that Joe Biden did after he got elected was to cancel the Keystone XL pipeline. In late December, the Department of Energy quietly admitted that this was a complete disaster for the United States of America. The Department of Energy determined in a report that the Keystone XL project would have created up to 59,000 jobs, real jobs too, not fake jobs like university administrators, but people who do stuff. It would also have had a positive economic impact of up to $9 billion. Alex Epstein is the author of Fossil Future and really one of the world's experts on energy. He joins us to assess this. Alex, thanks so much for coming on. So they're admitting what I think you were saying at the time, which is don't do this. This is a disaster.
Yeah, I mean, I looked into the details of the report, and it's the minimum possible admission they could make. I mean, this cancellation of Keystone has been an absolute disaster. Number one, it made good on Biden's promise. I guarantee you we're going to end fossil fuel. And so it was really the beginning of a reign of terror on the fossil fuel industry that has suppressed investment, production, refining, transportation. And they were required by law to make this report, but it's such a weaselly report. It tries to get away with saying there's nothing significant. It even pretends that the lack of heavy oil from Canada isn't a problem, even though it's clearly been a disaster that's caused us to beg to Venezuela. And it does that by, instead of addressing reality, it cites an Obama 2011 prediction saying it wouldn't be a problem. That's like ignoring the 2008 housing crisis crisis by citing a 2005 prediction that it wouldn't be a problem. So this is really just another denial of reality by an administration that wants to deny that its anti-fossil fuel policies have been an absolute disaster here and around the world.
So the admission is itself a whitewash. I mean, it's just so perfect. So if you just...
It's a total whitewash.
That's just unbelievable. Alex Epstein, I hope that we see you again soon. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
So a lot of people are drug addicts. Their preferred drug is fentanyl. Some people are publicity addicts. They just can't get enough. If you're not talking about them, they can barely breathe. That would include Prince Harry and the fake Duchess from LA. They'd like more attention, so they're trashing the royal family yet again. Prince Harry has made a bunch of new allegations, so we feel a little guilty repeating, but they're so over the top that we can't control ourselves, and so we'll tell you what they are after the break. Well, it looks like Prince Harry and that woman from LA that he married are running out of money. How do we know that? Because they're still talking about themselves, selling the most boring little details from their boring little lives for more money. So to that end, Prince Harry has just resorted to telling us even more about a dramatic physical altercation he had with his brother, which wasn't actually that dramatic. Quote, "He set down the water, called me another name, and then came at me," he says in his new book. Huh? But for some reason, a lot of media outlets in this country are deeply invested in the details of this boring man's boring life. Here's Good Morning America, for example.
There's a quote in this book where you refer to your brother as your beloved brother and arch nemesis. Strong words. What did you mean by that?
There has always been this competition between us, weirdly. I think it really plays into, or is played by, the heir spare.
Oh, so two brothers who had tension between them. Breaking news on Good Morning America. But if you're from Great Britain and these are the people who are supposedly, technically, the head of state of your country, what do you make of all of this embarrassing spectacle? Well, we thought it was time to check in with Father Calvin Robinson, who's an Anglican deacon from that country, who joins us tonight to assess. Father, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, how is this going over in your country?
Tucker, first of all, Happy New Year. How is it going over? I think we're all sick and tired of Harry and Meghan whining and moaning and going on and on. Well, most of us are anyway. You know, at first, when I first saw these headlines, I thought, okay, this is annoying, this is frustrating. They're being disparaging about the monarchy again, which of course is family to them, but to us it's an institution at the very fabric of our nation. But I'm past frustration. I actually feel sorry for Harry now. He's using really juvenile language. He seems quite immature, to be honest. I don't know any other grown man that talks about their private parts as their todger. You know, he talks about mounting a woman, and it's the kind of conversation I expect to hear in a primary school. Just in that clip you just showed, he talks about his brother as his arch nemesis. How many adults have an arch nemesis? He seems to live in a fantasy world. You know, in the excerpts we saw that Meghan was singing to seals, and Harry said she's magical because the seals sang back. I'm like, these people are delusional. This is not good. They need to seek help. They need to stop talking to the press, stop airing their dirty laundry, and actually get some professional medical help.
I wonder, I mean, you're obviously a man of the cloth. What does it do to your soul if you never stop talking about yourself?
Exactly. It's the inner narcissism. It's not good. It eats away at you. And it's not just talking about yourself. It's the fact that they don't seem to take any agency for themselves either. There's no personal responsibility. You know, in a few of these excerpts, we've seen that Harry says, oh, actually, it was Will and Kate who made me wear that Nazi uniform. And you're thinking, you're a grown adult. You don't have to wear a Nazi uniform to a fancy dress party if you don't find it funny. You clearly chose to do so. Don't blame everyone else. And the same, you know, he goes on to say that he had this altercation with his brother, and this is a trained army serviceman who's saying, I had a fight with my brother, I had to go seek therapy for that. It's like, first of all, you are a killer. You're talking about how many people you've killed in service, which of course is uncouth. No one talks about how many people they killed in service. But then on the other hand of the argument, you're saying, oh, I had an argument with my brother and I had to go and get therapy about it. None of it seems to add up. It's not balanced. He does need prayer. I think he needs all of our prayer. They both do. And they need something more professional too.
Yeah. I mean, no, I think, and you make a fair point that no one can make you wear a Nazi uniform to a dinner party. You did that. It's unbelievable. Father Calvin Robinson of the United Kingdom, thank you so much. We'll be right back.